Call to order for a Watertown City Council meeting for April 3rd, 2023. Is there Reverend Michael Leslie in the house? Okay, then please rise while Councilman Glenn Vilhauer leads us in prayer.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple words. I read this prayer at a council meeting probably a couple months ago. Really kind of resonated with me, and looking over the agenda and the full house tonight, I'd like to repeat it again. So let us pray. God of peace, we invite you to preside over this meeting. Even if we have different opinions, give us unity of spirit. Help us to each listen politely as others share their points of view. Help us to work as a unified team in combining ideas for a great outcome. Help us to work as a whole rather than as individuals trying to promote their own agendas. May we have a spirit of camaraderie in this room and work together in our shared mission. And all God's people said, Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay, Bueller. Here. Danforth.
Here.
Helene.
Here.
Paulson. Shetty.
Here.
Okay. Tupper.
Here.
Vilhauer.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. With that, the chair will entertain a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Paulson. Any conversation on that, Council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Just a note on tonight's proceedings is Councilman Shetty is present with us online. And for anyone who is upstairs watching, if you would like to come down and testify, I would ask that you come down and testify in person. Just make it that much easier. I'm not sure if there was someone who made a request to testify remotely, and I will find out for sure where that was left off. But if I'm not seeing anybody online who would like to speak, just feel free to interrupt at a time that you don't hear someone else speaking, and I'll try my best to pay attention to that. With that, now is the time for public comments. If there is someone here who would like to address the council on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda, now is your time to do so. Nobody is coming forward, therefore I will close public comments, open it up for a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Vilhauer, seconded by Councilman Danforth. Any conversation on that, Council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item A is an application for a special retailer's license to Lake Area Zoological Society for Friday, June 30th, 2023 for the Sippin' Safari event. Finance Officer Bob Zine. We know what Sippin' Safari is, but tell us anything specific about this.
Thank you, Mayor. Just as it states, this will be a special event license. All notices were given, fees have been paid, everything's in order, same location as always, so no changes. I can answer any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of this? Is there anyone who would like to testify against this? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the application? Motion made by Councilman Bueller. Seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any conversation on that, council? Questions? Motion is to approve the license. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item B is an application for a new retail malt beverage and South Dakota farm wine license to Sioux Valley Co-op. Finance Officer Bob Zine, this item B and item C are very similar. You have the leeway to talk to both B and C, although the council will take them up separately.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. As stated, these are new applications for malt beverage South Dakota farm wine. With these being not only a new license, but a first time the location has had it, we did get the approval from community development. They are C3, so that is a use that can happen there. So that step has been done. Public notice has been given. All fees have been paid. So everything is in order. If there's any questions, I can answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of this item? Is there anyone who would like to testify against? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the application? Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Paulson. Conversation or questions, council? Councilman Tupper.
And not to pick on Sioux Valley, because we've seen a lot of this lately with the convenience stores, grocery stores. When somebody opens up a new retail beverage farm wine license, is there any requirement by state that they do any training as far as, or city ordinance? You know, like if you open up a food license, you got to go through a training. Is there any carding people and stuff like that?
I will take it as City Manager Mack to answer the question unless you had
Yep.
someone else.
No, that's fine.
City Manager Mack.
I think Chief Toomey is probably best suited to answer what the requirements are.
Chief Toomey, could you please come up and illuminate the council?
Like I say, I'm not trying to pick on Sioux Valley. I mean, that's just, we've seen so many of them, I thought I'd ask that question, so.
Josh is here, and I think he can be picked on a little bit, but there is no required training. There is training available for, I think it's called Tim's training.
That's what I was trying to think of.
But
So.
it's not required unless there's a violation, and then you guys could require it.
Okay. Would that, Mayor, would that be a fair question to Josh, if he would like to answer that, what his plans are? Or?
I would allow him, but he does not have to.
Okay. There again, Josh, I'm not picking on you, buddy, so.
Josh Y, representing Sioux Valley Co-op in Watertown. So yeah, we will, our company has decided that we will train all of our employees in the program so that we're covered
Okay, thank you.
from that aspect, yep.
But that's not a requirement, so. Okay, appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Y. Councilman Y, go with that. Any further questions or comments? Hey, I always say if you have the guts to run for office and you're sitting back here, you get to wear that title for life. So, any further questions or comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the application. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Sorry about that, Councilman Shuddy. I hear you in the background, but item C is an application for a new retail malt beverage and South Dakota farm wine license to Sioux Valley Co-op. We have already heard from our finance officer, Bob Zine. I will open a public hearing if there is anyone who would like to testify in favor of this item. Anyone against? Close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the application? Motion made by Councilman Villauer, seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any questions or comments?
These are just, excuse me, Mayor, these are
Councilman
just
Tupper?
two separate locations, right? The Highway 20 location and Highway 212. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? The motion is to approve the application. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item D is a second reading of Ordinance 23-03, amending the zoning map of the City of Watertown, South Dakota for lots 2 through 5, Mansell Second Edition, from its current designation of R1 to CL Commercial Lake District. Public Works Director Heath Von Eye, please talk about this item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Pulling up some maps here for reference as we go through our discussion here. So this is second reading for a rezone of this property on the south side of Lake Kempesca, known as lots 2 through 5 of the Mansell Second Edition. It's currently zoned R1, single family residential. The proposed zoning district is CL. It's one of our more newly created commercial lake districts that we have in our zoning ordinance, chapter 21 of the city code. The applicant wishes to pursue the use of that zoning district and the either permitted or conditional uses within that zoning district as they're defined in chapter 21. The land area, sizing, and mass meets all the requirements of the CL district requirements. The application has, of course, been processed through the Planning Commission, who made a favorable recommendation to the council by a vote of 5-2 on their meeting that was on March 9th, 2023. There have been a handful of questions from the first reading that we, as staff, compiled some answers to. I could cite those now, Mayor, or wait till later in the conversation, but otherwise have some other information I could share via map.
I think it's up to your decision as far as what you want to share now, as long as you feel it's pertinent to the council's deliberations.
Certainly. I'll share my screen to Teams, if that could be brought up on the board. So one of the points of discussion at the first reading were, of course, heavily revolved around wetlands and Toby Slough and the impact of this rezoning to the extent of the wetlands in the slough area. One thing that we provided here, you'll see in this white hatched area, this white hatched area is presumably what the applicant could fill at a maximum in order to meet the 50% lot coverage rules that are currently in the CL zoning district requirements. Again, this is theoretical. This is not what the applicant is proposing to fill or grade or build on, but this is simply 50% of the land area that the city at most could allow to be developed if this rezone were approved, because the CL district requires a 50% open area, non-developed area, a non-coverage area, if you will, that would have to be retained. So that this, I wanted to point this out and then go a little bit further into the wetlands discussion. The application before the council tonight, of course, is a rezone. It is not an application to fill anything. It's not an application to grade anything. All grading and fill permits are administratively performed through the city engineer's office for under the context and the regulations that we've adopted with our floodplain regulations. Those are in Chapter 5 of City Code, and they specifically outline what has to be done to develop in the floodplain. I have another map here I'll pull up briefly and turn on the floodplain layer. You'll notice as this generates, this entire pink area is floodplain. There's a lot of floodplain, of course, around our lakes and throughout town. There's a few designated channels that are designated floodplain and detailed floodway. So our floodplain ordinance in Chapter 5 regulate then how somebody can develop their lots or their properties. And it's strict to meet certain elevation requirements that are established through the FEMA regulations. Our floodplain ordinance that we've adopted has been, it's pretty much boilerplate language that FEMA has created for cities across the country that participate in the flood insurance program. And as we've gone through that flood map creation, our detailed study years ago, we have designated floodways and floodplains. The floodways are what we're not supposed to disturb at all, and the floodplains are areas that we can develop under certain and strict guidelines. And so I just wanted to point out that any development that were to occur after any rezone or under the current zoning district that this land is in would have to follow those floodplain regulations because of the inundation being within that floodplain. Furthermore, there's another layer involved here with wetlands. The United States Corps of Engineers have the jurisdictional authority over the wetlands in this area. They would be the final and formal checkoff for any development that may impact any wetlands. So, again, whether this is rezoned or whether it's built on under the current zoning, what that would look like is the developer, as they come in for a building permit, the city staff would direct them to the U.S. Corps of Engineers to have a wetland determination performed on this land. That wetland determination would show them where exactly the wetland areas are, and they would have to either not disturb those areas or work with the Corps on how to mitigate those areas. If you go back to this previous drawing, in theory, this developable area, again, that's limited by the zoning ordinance, one could speculate that all the wetland area that is obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, that is apparent to look like wetland based on the aerial photography, that there is a certain portion of development that could occur on this land without touching or adversely impacting the wetland areas. With all that being said, I wanted to circle back to square one here, that this is a zoning application. And really, in my view, as the administrator of the zoning ordinance with the staff and the Public Works Department, would want to encourage the council to consider this from a land use standpoint. We have allowable or permitted uses in the CL zoning district, and we have conditional uses in the CL zoning district. So in our view, the decision before you is this land appropriate for those uses? The fill, the grading, all that, again, in my view, really has nothing to do with the zoning that's before you. That all comes and is heavily regulated and scrutinized through the development process. And councils before you have adopted floodplain development regulations in Chapter 5 of City Code. And we have our state statutes and our U.S. Corps of Engineer regulations that also then govern the fill, the grading, and the development of these lots. So this channel, the culvert, the wetland areas, I just want to emphasize you're making no decision tonight that impacts those things. Those things would be protected, reviewed, and administered accordingly to the, again, I'll call heavily scrutinized processes that the developer would have to go through in order to impact those areas. With that, I think that covered a lot of the discussion from the first reading. There might be a few ancillary questions that the council still has that we could circle back to as well through the discussion.
Thank you, Director Von Eye. I would just ask, just for clarification for the council, because I know that this came up last time and the council asked these questions. So from a wetland perspective, that's not our purview.
Correct.
That's purely up to the federal government.
Correct. We, as a local jurisdiction, have a, I'd call it a professional obligation to make sure that the developer contacts those authorities, goes through those checkoffs and those reviews, but the jurisdiction lies at the federal level with the U.S. Corps of Engineers. And that's who we defer them to. That's who we as staff make sure and check off that they've talked to. We get that information back from the Corps along with the developer getting that information, so we know where we can issue building permits and where we can't.
Okay. And also, you referenced the culvert/channel that goes from Lake Compeska into Toby Slough. That is also not under consideration in this zoning request, correct?
That area of land is part of the rezone request, but the function of it being filled or graded or obstructed absolutely is not. It's simply a land use question before you today. Does the CL district fit these 5 lots or not?
Okay, so in other words, the channel culvert is staying there regardless.
Correct.
So, okay. Council, just before we enter the public hearing, this did get approval from the Plan Commission, therefore it needs just a majority vote tonight from the council. With that, I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of this item?
I'm Eric Scott with Crestone Companies and Camsco. Aaron Hansen here is a partner of mine in Camsco, which is the owner of this property, and we are developing this together. We both own property adjacent across the street on South Lake Drive, and so we're here as also adjacent landowners. I'd like to just make a few points on some of the considerations. So first, a key point on development, and I know one of the things you all have to consider, and you have a lot of folks in this room that are maybe opposed to this development for environmental concern and other issues. But development does create a large economic impact for our entire community, and the community has spoken, and consultants and master plans for the Lake Campeska usage and for our community master plan have spoken to some of these things. But I like numbers, so to put some numbers to it, Our proposed development, which will be primarily sportsman condos, look a lot like contractor shops, but a little bit nicer. And then potentially some multifamily, either twin home or townhome style apartments. All said and done, this should be about $6 to $10 million in total construction. It will generate $40,000 to $60,000 per year in property taxes. The project itself will generate $40,000 to $60,000 in local sales tax, $80,000 to $120,000 in state sales tax, and another $60,000 to $100,000 in excise tax. As he said, I know environmental concerns is a big concern of a lot of folks in the room, and our civil engineer is here to speak to some of those concerns. I think one of the key points that I would make is that the improvement or the rezoning to CL is more likely, an improvement of this property is more likely to improve all of the environmental concerns than it is to be detrimental to water quality and other concerns. There's also some safety concerns. Aaron has his family on the lake. He'll speak to this a little bit right across the street. But to speak to that right now, Aaron and I share a golf cart. We golf quite a bit together. When I go to his house, oftentimes I have to park on South Lake Drive, parallel park next to his house. There's no room in the driveway, and we grab the golf cart and go. By having development or having a property across the road where we would own part of, I'd be able to park across the road and keep my vehicle off of South Lake Drive. And I think it would facilitate some other owners to both get recreational vehicles out of their driveway and declutter South Lake Drive. Those are all really small lots across the street. Many of the adjacent landowners would like to see this development because they want to purchase property over there so that they have better storage space. And then as far as zoning is concerned, one note I'll make is a PUD, planned urban development, which you guys are very familiar with because of the next topic that'll be coming up, was a consideration, and it's certainly an option. We decided to go with the CL district as developers, mainly because we have one building that we know is spoken for. We have sold. We have about 5 units worth of the sportsman's condos that we have buyers for. And we don't have the entire development planned. So I have a concept. I know what we'd like there, but we don't know exactly what the market's going to demand or 100% what we want to build on the entire property. So CL gave us some flexibility to have some options down the road, whether it be more sportsman's condos, the twin home concept, the townhome concept. The other thing, so the last thing on zoning is that we believe our proposed rezoning is consistent with the comprehensive land use plan, which was adopted by the City Council and the Lake Kempesca Master Plan. The benefits of the development are likely to be improved water quality, improved fish habitat, increased public access to the lake, and a fulfillment of the demand for storage for lake properties. That's all I got. I'll hand it over to Aaron. What's that? I'll speak to, so we did circulate a petition. Aaron and I spoke last Friday. We had over 13 signatures, 9 adjacent different properties. Some of those were husband and wife that signed the petition over the weekend in favor. The petition is relatively meaningless. I thought I emailed it to Brandy earlier in the day around noon, and apparently she never received that email. I'll see if I can get that to her right now, but really our idea behind that was just to show that there's a lot of people that are opposed to it, that are adjacent landowners. There's also many that are proponents of the development that weren't able to be here and speak on behalf of it.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. At the time that we became aware that the property was being annexed into the city to be developed, Eric and we decided that, we should probably purchase and develop the property ourselves as opposed to allowing an outside development to take place, and really who knows what we get at that point. I mean, I live across the street, and I'm also concerned with safety. I don't want to see a lot of density there. I want it to be something that is aesthetically pleasing to me, my neighbors, and really fits in the community, fits on the lake. We also, at the same point, we're sportsmen. We do care about the habitat. We do care about wildlife. But we both know that something is going to get developed there. And if we just allow somebody else to do it, they're going to do it their way as opposed to our way. And our way is to do it in a way that best preserves that habitat and that integrity. And then, there is some ideas we have to maybe even potentially work with other entities to help actually increase the habitat and increase the flow between Lake Kempeska and Toby Slough. And I know that's not why we're here tonight, but I just want to point out those are things that we do care about. As far as safety goes, I've got 2 small children. That matters to me, in terms of how fast people go on South Lake Drive. And they go fast. They go way faster than the posted speed limit that arguably maybe even needs to come down a little bit. But again, that's another topic for another night. But the point I'm trying to make is if I can park off the street, if I can, all these neighbors, we've got toys, we've got stuff that's out there and it clogs up South Lake Drive. If we've got an opportunity to get off the street, I can't help but think that increases visibility and therefore safety. So I think that's important as well. So yeah, that really is the whole concept behind what we're trying to do, and hopefully you guys would agree.
If you could entertain us for just a few more moments, I did ask Colin DeYoung to come, which he comes to a lot of these anyways, but to speak to the technical aspects of Phil, of the plans, of the potential effects on the lake. With your permission, I'll allow him to speak again. I know it may or may not be pertinent to questions and concerns that'll come up.
It's a public hearing, so as long as if he is a proponent, I mean, if he's not being paid or anything like that, although that's also a gray area. I mean, if it's a public hearing, if you're a proponent or an opponent, you have the right to be heard. So, Mr. DeYoung, if you're a proponent, by all means, you may speak, but please identify yourself and who you're representing.
Okay, I'm Colin DeYoung with Austin Engineering. We are the, consultants for the developers on this project. And I know some concerns were brought up as far as, what effect filling this property would have on the, the flood elevation of Lake Kempeska. So I thought one thing we could do is just kind of run some rough numbers and kind of see what that effect would be. So, to put the volume impacts into perspective, we assume the area of the site that would be filled is about 3.66 acres. And that's the total area west of the existing outlet channel. And then we assumed the total area within Lake Kempeska up to the base flood elevation is roughly 8.2 square miles. So the increase in runoff we also assumed would be 0.5, which is the post-developed runoff coefficient minus the pre-developed. And with a 100-year total rainfall depth of 5.76 inches, the increase in the water surface elevation to the lake would be 2/10,000ths of a foot, or roughly 1/540th of an inch, which is thinner than a piece of paper. And then I guess we had a few other points we looked at, but they're similar to what Heath Von Eye has, already explained to you. So,
Thank you very much. Any other proponents? Any other proponents? I'll open it up for opponent testimony. Just a reminder to be unique. If you want to repeat something someone else said, just to say, I concur, support that, that's enough. Just for the sake of time and uniqueness. Please identify yourself and who you're representing.
My name is Mark Roby. Thank you, Mayor. My name is Mark Roby. I live at 346 North Lake Drive. I'm here both as a resident of the lake and as a board member of the Lake Compesca Water Project District. And I'm speaking on behalf of that governmental agency that is responsible for water quality to the lake residents that have land on Lake Compesca, and they pay property taxes to us to do that work. And this is in follow-up to our letter to you dated March 17th, prior to the first reading. We're opposed to this rezone request, and we'll highlight 4 reasons. One, and the request really is about the CL Compesca Commercial Zone Ordinance, which, as you know, was adopted during COVID with very limited public input, and is at odds with the hundreds of citizens that participated in the development of the Compesca Master Plan 2 years prior. Maybe it was 3 years prior, I'm not sure. And as a result, you adopted the Compesca Master Plan, and yet, first time I've heard it being discussed at either of the prior meeting or this meeting was from the applicant. I've yet to hear the staff refer to the Compesca Master Plan, and I think that's a key document in looking at how it is at odds with the Commercial Lake District, and I really question its validity to the adopted Compesca Master Plan. And leaves the Compesca Water District wondering, why are we allowing a rezone that's at odds with the Compesca Master Plan? And given the public input to this point, especially from the neighbors and to our organization, we're opposed to it. Second reason is flood control. You just heard the engineer. There's a term I'd use. I won't use it here, but it's something in a windstorm. Not much. However, look at the precedent the City Council is doing as it removes the best flood storage areas and impacts those flood storage areas around the lake. There have been other actions by the council that have removed flood storage areas and water quality areas for development purposes. Just down the road from this piece of ground, there's a great location for the condo units that he's talking about, built just on Highway 139 west of Sandy Shores. Absolutely perfect location. And there are lots of other locations around the lake where this kind of application works. But why are we doing it in the middle of a wetland in a floodplain area? That's a huge question for us and the neighbors around the area. Toby Slough is important to flood control. It's important to water quality. In the Compesca Master Plan, it's identified as one of 3 primary disconnected or poorly connected wetlands proposed with improved connection. It's highlighted right there on the Compesca Flood Plan map. I'm sure you've seen that. Hope you've seen it. And yet, what are we going to do? We're going to develop it commercially. It doesn't make sense when there's plenty of other properties around it. Third reason, as stated in our March 17th letter, the City Council is under no obligation to become a partner in impacting a vital water resource like Toby Slough, given that there are plenty of other locations that are not in the floodplain or are not a wetland area. There's plenty of other locations for this kind of development. Finally, number 4, in the 97 and 2001 flood, this area was totally inundated. The roads were impassable, and the whole neighborhood and the county residents in the Toby Slough wetland areas to the south, watershed areas, are going to be impacted. Why would we allow development on this piece of property? It doesn't make sense. And so for that, with the Compesca Master Plan in mind, the Compesca Water Project District requests sincerely that you reject this rezoning requirement application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roby. Any further opposition? Just state your name and who you're representing.
My name is Warren Berg, and I represent myself. I just live east of the timing zone on the farm on the side of the hill. Lived there all my life. I've been all over that land. My father and mother owned that land. My brother owned that land. And getting back to letters, I've had 80 to 100 letters delivered here that are opposing this project. And
There is a culvert in Rondeville's land at 1062 South Lake Drive, and there is a 10-foot easement on that land that runs from Lake Kempesca to the north side of the road. And there's a box culvert that runs underneath the road. Then there's a short extension culvert that runs out. The rest of the way is an open channel to Toby Sioux. The water in Toby Sioux, just north of the site of 212, is 48.32 acres. Under the highway of 212, from the north side to the south side of 212, there are 3 culverts. The total water on the south side of the road is 42.16. The water on both sides of 212 is 90.48 acres. When Lake Kempesca and Toby Sioux water gets full, the water floods the land to the south. There are 8 landowners that get flooded either by farmland, pasture, or hay ground. About 100 acres at a bare minimum. Plus 1 township road that is between Section 6 of Pelican Township and Section 1 of Kempesca Township. The total of the water and the acres that I've been telling you about is 190 acres, 0.48 at the bare minimum. In 1997, this is all part of Lake Kempesca. It floods all out. Going to the north side of 212 on the lake road by the culvert looking south. To the east side of the channel, there's cattails and floods all the time. The west side of the channel, the land also floods. So looking south to the island, it was all cattails last year. When the Lake Kempesca and Toby Sioux is full, the water surrounds that island. If the channel is filled in, the water can't come into Toby Sioux or out of Toby Sioux. Toby Sioux is very good to Lake Kempesca and the city of Watertown for flood control, fish spawning, wildlife, and the safety of people and clean water. I hope the channel is to remain open. I don't know how big an easement there's going to be for the channel, but I hope the channel is still open. I have not seen any elevations yet on the zone land and how much filling on the Toby Slough. How about the traffic on the road? Snow removal, walking path. I hope each one of you reject this zoning plan, and there is quite a few other places on Lake Kempesca and the surrounding area to develop, not Toby Slough. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Any further opposition? Just want to bring up that the issue of the channel has been addressed. I mean, you can mention it, but keep in mind it is not germane to the council's deliberations. I mean, if someone privately on the council wants to have that in their brain, they can. Legally speaking, that is not what we are addressing tonight as an actual item. But go ahead, please identify yourself and who you're representing.
I'm Ron DeVille. I live at 1062 South Lake Drive. Just a couple of things I want to bring up. The lakeside that they're talking about is 2 old junk cabins across the road. I mean, we're on the lakeside there. And what I understand is they wanted to put piers in there so you'd have walking traffic between the Toby Slough side of the road to the lake side of the road. This is just hearsay, but it's pretty good hearsay. I got a picture of here right across from me. The guys was talking about we don't get a lot of water. This is the water we get. This here is another spring. the water we get. So when they talk about water, we know about water because I lived there since 1951. This water quality, sure. Water quality. They took they checked the quality of the lake one time in Toby Slough. Toby Slough's water was better than Lake Kempescus. 600 feet is as I always wanted to go hunting over there. Kurt says you got to stay 600 feet from the city limits to hunt. So you can't hunt over there. They brought up hunting. West of the channel there, that we can't do anything about because that's already been developed. I mean, they got that all filled in. They hauled dirt all summer. I talked to one of the guys. He wants to buy a lot over there, but he says they're too expensive. So I don't know what's going to happen over there, but we got a lot of damn dirt over there. What else is I going to tell you? Those lines on that map. I was at the county commissioners meeting before I went to the planning commission meeting, and they were concerned about those two lines on the map. I gave them all maps that we had, and they were concerned about the lines. Now, Lauren told me that those lines are in there. He has the water rights from that line to his property. They have the water lines from their property there, and then the guy that owns the property on the west side of Kurt Berg's land, he has the water rights or owns the water there. I don't know if that's true or not. I just picking up a little bit on that but the county commissioners was concerned about that. You know what? And I couldn't answer them at that time. So that's maybe something to look into. There's going to be a problem on that water if you're going to start letting. All my life I've lived there, or a good part of it. I never ever saw a boat on that water. And now if you put all these people there, you're going to put a string across there or something? You can't go beyond this. You can't. So you're going to have some more problems. So you just got problems after problems after problems. And so as you probably know, I'm against it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further opposition? So I also want to note something for the record. Mr. DeVille passed 2 pictures out. I had told Mr. Berg, he has come to City Hall a couple times. I had talked with him. He has dropped off a lot of letters that he had signed, and just for the record, I would like to notify or note these into the record. Start passing them off. You can take a quick look at them. I had told him that I would include those in the public record. So, okay. Any further opposition? Just please state your name and who you represent.
Yes, Nancy Beasley, 1032 South Lake Drive. What brings people to the lake? Is it the commercial properties on the lake and the natural areas around the lake? What is the compelling reason to change it? It was only residential for 6 years, and now we're already changing it to commercial. What's the long-range plan here? What is the Manziel property should probably never have been zoned into the city limits as R1, but it is allowed to fill that in even as an R1. The displacement of Toby Slough that goes over that land is going to affect flooding. As Mr. Vilhauer said during the prayer tonight, the council should not make a decision on what a few want. Mr. Scott said 9 husbands and wives, so 9 people plus the 3 builders want it. But what is the greater good? Mr. Scott said he's building this for vehicles to park because the homes out there don't have parking. I guess he's going to let me park my overflow guests there on 4th of July if this goes through, right? I have a lot of guests.
Excuse me. This is just to testify to the council.
All right.
Thank you very much. Any further opposition?
My name is John Kessler. I live at 938 South Lake Drive, and I lived several years at 1030 South Lake Drive, which is very close to this development. And there's a lot of what has been said is cut down what I need to say tonight, but one of the things I do want to point out, and it was brought up at the last meeting, is that there was kind of a impression that we were attacking the CL zoning. And I don't look at it as an attack on the CL zone. I look at it more as an open discussion. It is exactly why we're here, is the broad reach of this CL zoning. If we could, can you bring up the zoning map? Yeah. I think I have it right now. Yeah, the over, yeah. Okay. I was a member of the H2020 committee several years ago, and I was on the subcommittee for Lake Kempesca, and we took the H2020 initiative, took a lot of public input at that time, and I do remember that it was largely the input about Lake Kempesca was to create more recreation and entertainment opportunities in and around the lake. Then we as a city moved on to hire an outside firm to advise us on future developments of Kempesca, and from that the CL zoning was formed. Unfortunately, in my opinion, an outside firm doesn't necessarily have their finger on the pulse of the community and its wants and its needs as a whole, and based on their recommendations, the CL zoning ordinance was, in my opinion, became much too broad in its permitted uses. The CL ordinance allows for a combination of permitted and conditional uses, but to be blunt, I don't ever remember hearing the public asking for multi-unit high-rise apartment buildings, storage buildings, and car washes, all of which are included in the CL ordinance. So if this property were to be zoned tonight, there's no going back. We could, as a city, go back and look at this ordinance and maybe scale it back to something more appropriate to what the public input that we had in the past. But it would be too late for this property. All permitted uses, all 16 of them would be allowed and certainly would be grandfathered in. And she has it up there now. The owners and developers, all due respect to them, they came forward tonight and they told us what their plans are. But and I have no way questioning their integrity at all. But plans do change and can change. Something could change and they could sell this property. Even the property could be sold with existing structures. Those structures could be torn down and we could look at any and all of these uses, including multi-family dwellings. So do you have the map of the zoning? The one right below I'm sorry, the one right below the zoning.
Randy or IT, could one of you share whatever you're showing on this screen to Teams so that everybody on Teams could see that as well, please? Mainly Councilman Shetty.
Oh, no, it wasn't. Yeah, that's okay. We don't. I'll just. Yeah. One of the things that I was going to maybe Mr. Von Eye or Ms. Hanton could address here is the stormwater runoff retention on a CL. The first map that Mr. Von Eye pulled up had basically what the 50% use could be on that property, but there also would have to be stormwater retention. And so what effect of the stormwater retention would that have if that goes into an existing wetland? And I'll pull a picture up here shortly of some pictures I took last night. Yeah, so this pictures are a lot better than looking at a topographical map. And this picture is the east side of the property in question. And as you can see, there's already some retention nets there.
Hold on, sorry.
No, that's fine. And so you can move on to the next one. Yeah. So this is the easternmost part of the property, and you can see the island in the background there. The next one is adjacent to that, and as you can see, the rushes and the lowlands there. This, I believe, in Mr. Von Ey's map was part of what would be considered undevelopable. But there also would have to be stormwater retention involved in that map, and this would probably fall into that category of stormwater retention. So, but do we know what that is going to do to water quality as opposed to leaving it the way it is? This is just another shot a little bit farther down and to show where the island is. Maybe we can move on from that one. And then, of course, the channel here. So that was, like I say, just a little bit better perspective than looking at a topographical map of what we're dealing with here.
And Mr. Kessler, I will just say, I can speak on behalf of the council that there's only one councilman who I don't know for absolute certain has not been out there twice in the last week.
And that is great to hear.
So
thank you.
I can say the pictures are great, but we have seen them ourselves. So for the sake of time, and also I've given you leeway because you're trying to coordinate pictures with a computer that isn't your own. But
no, that's fine. In fact, if I'd have known that ahead of time, I could. So I'll just, with that, I will just close, and I will say that, as it was said before, there's just many other places that are much more appropriate for development around the lake. And for that reason, I am opposed to it. And I'll just close by saying, even in the Planning Commission meeting, Mr. Kays was addressing another commissioner when he said that there are 16 uses here for this property. If any of those uses that you're uncomfortable with, then you need to vote against it. So with that, I thank you for your time and consideration.
thank you very much. I just want to thank you for that. But yeah, and just to state that I know that the council has visited the area, just talking with several of the members. But any further opposition?
Landon Weber, 1040 South Lake Drive. Toby's Slough is like our backyard pretty much. I concur with everybody else, not a lot to add to that. We have 4 young kids there. And like Aaron said, that would be awesome for himself to have, but that's not going to help out a whole lot of other people. That road is so busy as it is that if they have, 20 other families living there, who knows what could be there. It's just crazy traffic as it already is. And the only other issue that I don't think has been addressed is we were told that there would be a bike path possibly built someday along the slough there. I don't know how that, if plans change or how that would affect what's being proposed here, but I thought that was part of the city plans at some point. But that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further opposition? Any further opposition? Anybody upstairs? I just warn people from now forward, if you're upstairs and you know you want to testify on something, you can feel free to come down. We've got a chair for you, or we can make one. Any further opposition?
Hi, I'm on the phone.
Yes, I can hear someone on the phone. Please state who you are and who you represent.
My name is Gretchen Rohde, and I represent my mother, Joanne Rohde, who owns the property on 1046 South Lake Drive. My brother, Jason Rohde, is also on the call. And I concur with everything that has been said, and I'll keep this brief, but just wanted to reiterate a couple of points. We bought property there in the 1970s. So 1046 South Lake Drive was where we grew up and where we spent every summer. We loved the peacefulness and the beauty and the residential area, as well as looking at the beauty of the lake and Toby Slough. There was wildlife, cattails, streams. It was a beautiful place as we were growing up. But as we got older, we also saw the devastating impact of flooding in the area. Every spring, it always seemed like there was water going over the road. And we saw what happened on the Toby Slough side as well, where that actually, had more water there. In addition, it was also, in addition to it being a habitat for wildlife and plants, we saw how the slough played a role in the water storage and retention, really the whole ecosystem of the lake. If the fill is brought in and there is commercial development, it seems like the impervious area of the land would increase to accommodate sidewalks, roof structures, and as we heard, parking lots, as he said one of the uses potentially would be parking lots, much more than a typical residential development. And that would be an impact to flooding. And as I think a lot of people have talked about, there's just so many people that are concerned about the flooding impact. And I'm just concerned too about the wetland areas. It sounds like we don't know if the wetland is impacted until someone wants to develop it. So I'm interested in understanding how we can rezone it if we don't even know if that is a possible use, if there is a large wetland area there. Once again, as other people have said, there's 16 diverse permitted uses for this land. Each comes with pros and cons. When the developer talked, he talked about, the contractor shops that would be called these sportsman's condos, talked about, storage spaces and parking lots. Don't really want to look at that. And as other people have said, we really don't know what could be developed there. And the final point is lake access. A couple of people talked about lake access. And even the developer said that they would want to have access to the lake. And I think Ron DeVille had mentioned too, it could be in that area where there's those two shacks, which is right next to our property. We really would not want to have that much traffic going in and out, and potentially a boat dock or something like that, which could actually add to the traffic on the lake in an area that really is more of a residential area, and more of the traffic flows down towards Sandy Shores. So in summary, we're really not in favor of rezoning this area. It would forever change the beauty and character of our property and could increase flooding risks and have an impact to safety as well as even impacting property value. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you leave, could I have you spell your last name for us for the records?
It's R-O-T-I.
R-O-T-I. Okay, thank you very much.
Correct.
Any further opposition?
Jeff Ranum. I live at 956 North Lake Drive. I'm here representing myself, my wife. I also want to disclose I'm also a member of the Lake Board and am in opposition to the rezoning. I'm also a bicycler. I bicycle around the lake frequently, enjoy the scenery, look forward to having some additional bike path in the area. But mostly I enjoy the scenery we get as we go through that portion of the lake, the wildlife. It's one of the few areas as you go around the lake that you've got the wetlands, you've got Toby Slough. On the opposite side of 212 is about, I think, the only eagle's nest I've observed in the trip around the lake that's there. And I just worry about the impact on the wildlife. And we've got some outdoorsmen that are proponents, but I don't know that I think we should all collectively consider the consequences of some of the development, how that impacts some of the other wildlife we've got, because those are certainly also things that add to the character and the image of Lake Compasca. And I would hate to lose those things over some development when there is adjacent space within a quarter of a mile to the west that would be suitable, convenient, and would not create the impact that most everyone in the room here is opposed to. Lost my train, I apologize, but thank you for your consideration. Oh, other thought. There are lots around the lake that aren't buildable. I live over on 956 North Lake. We're just adjacent to Sunset Drive. The flooding impacts that side of the lake as well, as there's a slough that's there, part of the county park area. And there was a house that flooded terribly over there multiple times, and eventually the house was taken down. I believe the city maybe even acquired that land to prevent people from building on that lot that was in the floodway. That's my understanding. It's not a statement of fact. But I'd like to suggest the possibility that there can be lots around the lake that aren't suitable for building. I'm suggesting these ones that we're discussing tonight might be just such lots, not suitable for building. And if they're not suitable for building, there's really no purpose to take the additional step to consider the rezoning as contentious as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further opposition? Any further opposition? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Is there a motion to approve the zoning request? Motion made by Councilman Danforth, seconded by Councilman Vilhauer. To open up to the discussion, just to make one thing clear, not that anyone was necessarily wrong, and it is semantics perhaps, but there are 9 permitted uses, 7 conditional uses. It is not just all 16. It is 9 definitely. If you if you rezone this, approve the rezone, you definitely have all 9 of those would be open it up. Not necessarily so with the 7 conditional. Just wanted to make that clear. Okay, open it up for conversation. Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. Same Mayor. I have probably 2 or 3 questions. You want me to just go one through the other, or do you want to do one at a time, or how would you prefer?
I would say as long as you got the floor, go for it.
Okay. Heath, can you help me just a little bit when we talk about lot coverage? I understand that certainly includes structures, but does it include hard surfaces? So if I have a parking lot or if I have sidewalks, are those included as part of the lot coverage calculation, or is it just structures?
The lot coverage is referring to impervious surfaces. So that would be your sidewalks, your pavement, your rooftops, things of that nature that would create a higher concentration of runoff from the site.
Okay. And for any surfaces here, driving surfaces, are there any requirements for whether they be gravel or whether the requirement for pavement, asphalt, concrete? Are there, in these scenarios in a CL, what's the requirement there?
Driveways would be required to be paved, like in all zoning districts, paved with asphalt or concrete.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell me what the right-of-way width is on that road? What is that? Is that South Lake Drive? I think it is. What's the right-of-way width? I did not see that on the map. I couldn't see it anywhere, actually.
Take me a second, but I can measure it here off the map. I'm guessing it's 66 feet like most of our right-of-ways are, but this one might be an anomaly.
And then with that, my follow-up question on that one, Heath, if you would, is where the road is at right now, where is that within that 66 feet? Is it centered? Is it?
The right-of-way is 80 feet.
It's 80 feet.
Which is our other common right-of-way dimension. And the roadway is, I would say, fairly symmetrically centered within that right-of-way.
So if we were to look at widening that road, we would be taking away what's already a shorted area on the north side with a lot of those properties there, correct? If we were to go on each side of the road, equivalent amounts.
Yeah, let me quick share here. This map just regenerated for me. I guess Brandy's got it up on there already. It does look like the road is maybe tucked a little bit further to the north as that map just regenerated. And here I got my screen sharing now, if that's up. But in any case, if you expand on the north or the south, what we would likely do is split the difference on where it makes most sense for any kind of widening of that road in the future. If we have more room to the south, we'd widen more to the south. In some areas might be the inverse of that.
Okay. 2 more questions, if you just bear with me for a second. One of the permitted uses is apartments. And when I looked up the definition of apartments, it said C dwelling unit. And when I go to dwelling unit, it almost indicates like it's a single structure item. It says nothing about multifamily units. What could be built there from an apartment standpoint?
You know, the definition of apartments, you're right, can be defined as little as something with nominal number of units, like a threeplex, I'll use for example, or something with a lot higher density number of units, you know, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen units. Now, what could be developed on this lot would all depend on that, the mass and sizing of that structure in relation to the zoning ordinance regulations. You know, the developed area for the building and the required parking area and all the ancillary impervious surfaces that would have to go with an apartment still could not exceed that 50% lot coverage. So I don't know if that helps.
Well, what
answer that
confuses
question.
me is when I look at all of our residential zoning,
Yeah.
it specifies very specifically what's allowed, right? We just went through this going from R2 to R3. For example, R2 you can have duplexes. I think you could have a threeplex as a conditional use. So it's very specific as to the size of something, meaning units per se, right? Not necessarily the physical size of the structure, but the units. In this particular case, I have no idea what could be allowed there. Because we're talking about available space using the 50%. That doesn't mean anything to me when I try to determine physically what could go in there. The definition as it is right now doesn't work because there's no stipulation there. The concern that I have with some of that is some of that's going to be dictated by height. 3 of the 5 lots could allow a 60-foot high building there because of they're greater than 150 foot of frontage. At least that's the way I read the ordinance. 2 of them wouldn't qualify. They'd have to be 35 feet or less. But 3 of them could be as high as 60 feet. So with that, I have a concern what apartment means as it relates to those units. So that's just a throw up because it's a concern. The other thing is, and my last question is, the applicant has talked about contractor shops. We don't have a definition for contractor shops. Not auto that I printed off the city webpage. We have storage shops and we have storage units. And storage shop does not permit commercial use. And the applicant has talked about his building being for something about sportsman units and commercial, but they can't have that in the permitted use, which is a storage shop.
Councilman,
So then we go to,
oh, sorry.
So we go to storage unit, which is a conditional use, which is a step down from a permitted use, and they could have commercial or personal there, but that's a conditional use. So in our consideration, we have to look at it and say, what he's suggested he's going to do doesn't exist by our definition, so the closest one is a conditional use.
Yeah, if I could, I don't want to speak for the developer, but when he used the term contractor shops, storage shops is the term that previous used term was changed to and redefined. So storage shops are essentially what we used to call contractor shops. They're essentially, they allow living quarters where storage units do not. That's the main difference between the two, between a storage shop and a storage unit, is one allows living quarters and the other one does not.
Are our definitions on the system up to date? Do we know?
I believe so, yeah. And storage shop should be defined in the Chapter 21 ordinances.
Storage unit is, and let me read it. It says for storage of commercial or private goods and materials in individual units within a common structure without water or sewer.
Correct.
Okay.
No living quarters is the purpose.
The other one, a storage shop says a building for personal use only. Well, then that's not commercial. It's personal use. Each structure is allowed to have water and sewer. Commercial uses and living quarters are prohibited.
City Manager Mack actually has something to say on this as well.
We do have a definition for contractor shops and storage yards within the Chapter 21 ordinance. And the definition is use of land or buildings for storage and preparation of materials used by that same individual in conducting business, including but not limited to construction, repair work, fabrication, and assembly, and incidental retail sales. Each unit shall have separate water and sewer utilities.
Councilman Danforth, back to you.
I'm sorry, but it does say for conducting business. Again, that's in conflict with what was suggested in regards to the sportsman units. Yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
City Manager Mack?
Sorry, I just want to ask some clarification. I'm learning as well. So the way that I read the contractor shop and storage yard definition, it's that these spaces can be used for storage and preparation of materials used by that person in conducting business, but the business doesn't have to necessarily be conducted in that space.
If I could, Mr. Mayor,
Director Von Eye?
call on Ms. Hanton, Community Development Manager, and have her walk us through those terms and how they apply to the CL district and the list of permitted uses. If you could, please, Brandy.
Yes, thank you, Heath. So as far as so contractor shops are not a use that can be utilized in the CL district. So the storage shops, which I believe is what the applicant is referring to, kind of man caves for more common terms. So we don't want, even though it's in the commercial lake district, we don't want it to be, this property should not be used for contractor conducting your business out of there. There's more appropriate zones for that. This is really, the storage shops are really for another garage or personal storage. And then as far, did that, I guess, touch on the definitions well enough?
An example, Brandy, would be the storage shops on the southwest side of the lake on the west side of Old Highway 139.
Yes. Yeah. Or with what it's being developed at Prairie Winds right now. So just for additional personal storage. And then is it okay if I touch on the density question that Councilman Danforth had asked about as far as, so he's right, in the R3 district, we do have the density thresholds where if you have a certain amount of square footage, you can have a certain amount of units, and that's all based on how many bedrooms they have as well. In the CL district, we don't have that, and as Heath had touched on, the apartments are the definition, it says C dwelling unit, so it's very wide open on what could be implemented as far as apartments. So if it were to be townhouses, row houses, a true apartment, anything, it kind of leaves that open. But then where the CL district has their restrictive density is from the 50% lot coverage, really. So they're going to be bound already because depending on how many units they have to accommodate that with parking spaces. And they can't, usually people use their setbacks to accommodate off-street parking and parking lots, but they also cannot. So their setbacks have to remain we call them transitional yards, so they have to remain open and undeveloped. They can't even use it for parking or driveways. So it's self-restrictive on how much density they can have. If that clarifies, otherwise I'll stand by with any follow-up questions.
Thank you very much. Any further? Excuse me. Any further questions, comments? Councilman Tupper?
Yeah, I've been one of those ones that have probably been out there more than 5 times. Matter of fact, I got yelled at by somebody one day because they said I was walking in there and too far. But this is one I really struggle about. And I really struggle going back to 2018. And thanks to Ms. Hanton, she was able to get me the information to view the not only the Plan Commission meeting, but the City Council meeting when that was first addressed and first annexed into the city and zoned R1, there was no opposition. I mean, there was, Mr. DeVille was the only one there, and his opposition at that time was somewhat the same as what it is now, but somewhat different. If I would have been here in 2018, I would have opposed it. I mean, I really have a feeling, the same feeling that a lot of people in this room do, that Toby Slough should stay Toby Slough, but we're kind of beyond that point. So is C1 correct? I don't know. I mean, I'm just really struggling with this one because that's really what's in front of us tonight, is because what I talked about in 18, that's passed. But I was really surprised that nobody, including the Lake Kapeska Watershed District or nobody that was neighbors that lived right across the street, opposed it, other than Mr. DeVille. So everybody was in favor of residential across there, which could have housed, I don't know how many homes, but now everybody's against CL. And I think it's that definition is the problem I really have is our CL district is, although the mayor has clarified that, is 9 uses. I just really struggle with their CL ordinance. And I'm going to have a hard time with this one, but I just had to get that out. So,
Thank you very much. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a lot of valid concerns, obviously. I do think that the water quality and stormwater runoff is being addressed, or will be addressed, by the requirements set forth by the state and our design standards. So that does ease my concerns a little bit, because obviously they have to meet these requirements, otherwise they cannot build there, and that's a proven fact, and that's why they have their engineer here in the room. As far as the Lake Kapeska Water District letter, I would question if this is even in their charter. I think it's outside their charter, especially some of the testimony we heard. This is a zoning issue and not a water quality issue per se, and so I struggle with that too. You know, of the respondents to the Kapeska Water Plan, Master Plan, of the 526 people, 25% or 131 didn't even live in Watertown. And this CL district has been worked on for well over 20 years, off and on, and there was a lot of work put into it. I was there for a lot of the discussions when I worked at the city, and I take my hat off to the staff that sat through it, the people that were in that room constantly. There was a lot of lake residents. There was a lot of input put into that, a lot of discussion. And yeah, is there quirks to work out? Absolutely. Any zoning district, we could say that. But of the 9 permitted uses, using, I guess, common sense, is some of those wouldn't make sense on a lot like this. Even the conditional, I mean, a car wash is not going to fit on that, not realistically, and that's where I mean, we've seen over and over, obviously, people fighting the change in the zoning around the lake. Stony Point was definitely one of them, and I would argue that it probably actually increased or improved the water quality and the fisheries aspects of it, because they built the marina, and that gives a lot of fish, you know, better breeding grounds and stuff like that. And also with zebra mussels, we can argue water quality, but zebra mussels are taking care of that water quality for us, and it's unfortunate, but it's a realistic fact that we have to face, that they are here and they're going to stay here until someone else figures out how to get rid of them. So that's kind of where I'm sitting on this, and you know, I do put a lot of weight in the Plan Commission's decision, and they did pass it, so that's where I'm sitting.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to start out by saying thank you to those of you that reached out to me. Please know that we do listen to your comments. I heard from both the proponents and the opponents, and I appreciate that feedback. I hate going into an issue and not having any kind of sense of where my constituents, and this is the ward that I represent, where my constituents stand on this. I do appreciate that. I do want to reiterate what Councilman Tupper just said. I too went back and watched the 2018 discussion about when this was annexed in, and I was on the council at that time, so I'm one of them that voted in favor of that. But Councilman Tupper is right. There was absolutely no opposition to that annexation and to the R1 zoning designation at that time. And that, I think, is the reason we are now dealing or struggling with this decision today. I've got to defer to those that know a whole lot more about, you know, when it comes to flood control, water quality, et cetera. I've got to defer. I've got to rely upon what people are telling me, and I have to form my own opinion from that. So that one is I've heard good arguments on both sides of that. But to me, what it boils down to relative to the lake is that to me it's not an improvement to the lake, and there's any chance of harm being caused to the lake, I have a hard time supporting that. And that's where I'm coming out on this side of this conversation. Another reason that I am having a hard time supporting this is because of I've been out there several times. I get out there at least once a week. I've been out there several times more recently. But that is to me is a dangerous area. To me, it does appear to be a narrow street. I've had a lot of people over my 8 years in the council that have raised that concern to me and are pleading for that bike path to be completed out there. And I've been after staff to make sure we can get that job done sooner rather than later. But I am concerned about that. And if this zoning change were changed, I am concerned about what that would do to you know, possibly make that a more unsafe area than it already is. I don't want to make it sound like, hopefully none of you are impugning the integrity. I know the proponents, they're good people. I hope that they're not feeling like they're being impugned by those that are in the neighborhood, by the comments that they're hearing, because I admire them for bringing forth this plan. I do want to address one thing, Mr. Roby. You said we never addressed the Lake Kempesca master plan. I did bring that up 2 weeks ago at the first hearing, so that had been addressed at that time, because yes, that is an area where there has been concern expressed in the Lake Kempesca master plan relative to the wetlands, et cetera. So you can probably gather where I'm shaking out on this. It's been a tough decision, but I have to listen to what my constituents are telling me, and that is why I'm coming down on the side of being in opposition to this.
Councilman Schutte.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I do. I appreciate the developer bringing this forth, and I appreciate the neighborhood. Everyone who is there for or against the process itself is proving out to even help us make a decision on this. Quite honestly, though, to simplify for me, I mean, I was a resident at the lake for 13 years back in the day, and it's definitely a big asset for the community. It's, you know, I raised my family here. The lake was a big part of what I really appreciate about this town. So with that said, though, to simplify this process, I guess what I'm looking at is I'm not voting for the developer may have a nice idea there, a plan potentially that may work, may not work. But that's not what, I guess for me personally, that's not what I'm voting for. I'm voting for a commercial lake. One gentleman did bring that up, that what we're looking at is what the entire commercial lake zoning will offer, or what we can build up to. Mr. Kays at the Planning Commission had said it well too. What we're voting for is we're voting for the entire list up to its maximum potential. And so when I'm looking at it that way, as much as the developer could say, hey, we're coming up with some 700 square foot guest homes across the street for the neighbors to use free across the street. We're going to put it up on stilts so that way the water problem's not an issue. I still couldn't vote for it because we're not voting for that. We're voting for what the potential max of a commercial lake property is. And maybe someday we can review and get better. What was started is good. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, what we've done with the commercial lake zoning, but to improve on it, always improving where we're at currently. So that's my perspective on this is voting on what the max commercial lake is, not on the development itself as much as it could be a good development. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, Mayor. Just what we're being asked here tonight is if we feel that this is a appropriate zoning designation, this request for this property. That's what it kind of comes down to. You know, and we have to look at permitted uses. We have to look at conditional uses, and the developer might have a real responsible plan for some of these things. But we always have to look at the future, what can happen with any of these zoning designations, the permitted uses. Conditional uses, that can fall in the hands of planning commissions down the road, and then that could also be forwarded on to city councils down the road that aren't near as smart as we are, maybe, you know. I'm just joking about that, but anyway, I just think that when you look through that list, to me, it just doesn't seem at all like it's the appropriate zoning designation for that. You know, and there are the issues of height restrictions. That could be a problem. 60 feet, the road flooding. That road is narrow. Yes, I have been out there, not 10 times like some of the folks have, but I've been out there and looked at it. The flooding certainly could be an issue, I think, down the road. Snow removal, but I just don't think at this point in time this is the right designation for that property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I, like some have spoke out in the audience, have concerns with the ordinance unto itself, but it's a whole other issue. I do want to just, and I stated this at the last meeting, is, you know, it's been stated that it was wrong for this to be brought into the city. It was unfortunate. We got to remember that in the county, it could have been R1 or their residential zoning. They could have done everything in the county that we're allowing under the R1. The only difference is where do they get their utilities, where do they get their water, sewer, et cetera. So that really, bringing it into the city, in my opinion, wasn't a bad thing because it gave us as a city more control over what went in there. I look at where we're at, and Councilman Bueller and I have spent a lot of years on the Plan Commission, and time again, we have dealt with requests at and around the lake that were really the result of no planning or very poor planning from 100 years ago or 80 years ago or 70 years ago. If I look at this right now, I look at it and say, let's not continue that trend. We understand zoning way better than we ever have. And so let's make sure that what we're doing is good development for what we classify as one of our most important assets within our community. So once we set this in as commercial lake, it'll always be there. What gets built there will survive all of us in this room for a lot of years. And that concerns me because there are things in here that no matter what we say, and I know the applicants, and again, I know it's been said, this is not about not trusting their word. This is about the process. And like we have had to deal with in the R3 request up in Eastwoods, and we'll deal with that a little bit later, there's no assurances as to what somebody's going to build. We have no guarantees. You can tell us what you're going to build, and you can show us pictures, but we have no guarantees that's what's going in there. The 9 permitted uses up there really isn't 9. If you read the definition, there's a lot of uses within that are listed. And some of those, for example, retail establishment, well, that's pretty broad. Well, it could be a gas station. It could be a repair shop. What's a repair shop? I looked and I couldn't even find a definition of a repair shop. Health professional, educational services. I mean, so there's a lot more uses within those definitions that are more than 9 and that in my opinion, need to get looked at and considered. find my notes here. The building height is a concern. We can say there's not room there. Well, we know what happens. We know that we have to anticipate things happening, not assuming they won't happen. Lots get combined to give more space so that now all of a sudden I can go 4 stories high and have a 60-foot high unit there in an apartment. There's no assurances that we aren't going to have that. I'm concerned with the traffic area, the flow that's there. Again, one of the permitted uses, I believe, is a campground. Well, okay, is that a good spot for it? I don't know. I just don't think this area is a good fit for any commercial development. It's a good spot if you're going to do it for residential and have some individual homes or some twin homes there, and that is more appropriate. Again, setting aside any water issues for this land. So, like Glenn, you can tell where I'm at on this thing, and it's just not the right fit for this location within our community.
Councilman Tupper.
Just to clarify one of Mr. Danforth's comments, or maybe not comments, in 2017, before it was ever annexed into the city, it was brought to the county for a variance and turned down by the county at that time. And that's when they seek the annexation through the city the following year.
Councilman Bueller.
I just want to mention one other thing too. When we look at these things, we have to take in consideration what the folks want and what they don't want that are adjacent to these properties. And there's overwhelming appears to be opposition to this project. So that kind of plays into my decision typically as well. But I do want to say, I want to thank everybody for taking time tonight out of their schedule and for you folks to have the concern that you do about your city and how we develop to make time to come out here for this tonight. Folks upstairs too. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further council comments? Chair would just like to say I thank everyone for their testimony tonight. I want to say a special thank you to our staff and our Plan Commission. The Plan Commission especially are people who do not get a lot of thanks for what they do, and it is a very, very tough job, and they are forced to make decisions based upon the letter of the law. Likewise, our staff is tasked to implement according to the letter of the law. And the letter of the law, regardless of how you might like it or dislike it, is Commercial Lake District is a possibility. And therefore, they are forced to implement or make their decisions likewise. So while I do not know exactly where the vote is coming out, I do believe I can count noses, as most people can here. Just want to say, this is not to impugn any work that has been done by our staff or the work that has been done by the Plan Commission. I will also be basing my vote based upon basically the permitted uses. We've been talking a lot about zoning in the last couple months, and when you approve a zoning request and you open it up to anything that could be under that umbrella, well, certainly we would all have different opinions upon what would be a good use and a bad use. But when we just have the option to say rezone it CL or not, then we have no control over it, and that gets a little bit beyond my comfort zone. So with that said, I will ask the finance officer to call the roll.
Okay. Bueller?
No.
Danforth?
No.
Helene?
No.
Paulson? No. Shetty?
No.
Tupper?
No.
Billhauer?
No.
Motion fails.
Motion fails. We'll go on to item E. A second reading of an ordinance amending the zoning map of the City of Watertown for Lot 3, Stony Point, Second Edition, from R1 Single Family Residential District to CL Lake Commercial District. Public Works Director Heath Von Eye, please tell us more about this.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This, too, of course, is a rezone of similar nature. The action that was just taken. Different location at the lake. The applicant's proposing to rezone this property from R1 to CL Lake Commercial. And I'm pulling up a map, a vicinity map for reference. It is this residentially zoned lot that's highlighted right here. That's out in the Stony Point vicinity. You do have adjacent CL to the south, and then otherwise zoned as C2 to the east and R1 to the west. With that, this one was brought to the council with a non-approval recommendation from the Planning Commission. So it would take a 2/3 vote from the council to approve this one, meaning 5 out of the 7 voting yes in favor of, to reverse that Planning Commission recommendation. With that, I'll stand by for questions with staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair will open a public hearing on this item. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of this? Anyone who would like to testify in favor? Is there anyone who would like to testify against this? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do we have a motion to amend the zoning map? So, motion made by Councilman Bueller, second by Councilman Tupper. Open it up for questions and comments, council. Yeah, it is to approve the request. Yes, it is in the affirmative. Any questions or comments, council? Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, a lot of my issues on this one are the same as what we just went through, albeit slightly different in that I understand that when land is annexed, it's platted, it's it's zoned. I know that's all an initial thought as to what's going to go in there, and I also understand that there's reasons why those thoughts can change, and thus a zoning request. But when we have residential lots, and we have 3 of them there, I believe, that are combined on the hill, and we have one that's already built there, we have an obligation. This is my opinion. There's nothing in the ordinance or anything that says, but it's just my feeling that we have an obligation and a responsibility to protect those people that have already made investments based on what we said the plan was going to be and what the developers were. So this particular one, again, I concur with the Plan Commission, which they said it should not be approved, and that's where I'm at with this one as well.
Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. To me, this one actually makes a lot more sense to rezone, but with nobody here to testify for and give a reason why, it makes it really hard to defend that. But to Councilman Zandfor's comment about the Planning Commission is, it seems to me that we're picking and choosing when to follow the Planning Commission's recommendation, and that does frustrate me a little bit. Is we pick it when it helps us, and then we go against it when we don't agree. So I do have a little problem with that, but with no testimony for, I don't see how I would ever support this.
Any further questions or comments, council? Councilman Tupper?
Just, I'm going to have to agree on that. With no proponents here to speak for it, it's really hard to support it one way or the other, so.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the zoning amendment. All those in favor will, so if you want to rezone it to CL, then you vote yes. If you do not approve, you vote no. So, Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay. Bueller? No. Danforth?
No.
Helene?
No.
Paulson? No. Shetty?
No.
Tupper?
No.
Billhauer? No. Motion fails.
Motion fails. Item F is a second reading of Ordinance 23-07, a zoning map amendment for a portion of property to be known as the Eastwoods 19th Edition and a portion of Lot 37, Block 13 of Eastwoods 17th Edition from their current designations of R2 and A1 to PUD Planned Unit Development. Public Works Director Heath Von Eye. please give us the rundown.
Thank you, Mayor. So, of course, we've seen this a few times. It was first proposed as an R3 rezone sometime back. That, of course, got denied. The applicant hit the drawing board and decided to come back with a planned unit development application where they then become specifically tied to the improvements as they're outlined in the PUD plan. That plan, of course, is a series of drawings and exhibits on what the layout of their parcel, their property development would look like, and also includes a narrative, a written narrative that summarizes what can and can't be done on that property and how it's managed. So with that, this did come to the council with recommendation for approval from the Planning Commission. And yeah, I'll stand by for questions with staff at that point.
Thank you very much. I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of this item?
Good evening. Kellen Bludorn here with Archer Land Company and my business partner Dustin Kottman. I'll spare the details. I know we've talked about this many times, so I'll try to make this as short as possible. We did have a visit with the city today in regards to a few minor things like landscaping and stuff. I know it doesn't call out every little plant. We did put in there that there'd be some trees, approximately 40 trees, 8 foot in height. We visited with Brandy today in regards to a fence along this southeast side to help screen any headlights. I know that was some concerns in the last meeting, and I know I sent a few pictures there to Brandy. It would be our intention to put a fence there as well as around the trash cans. And with that 3D map up there, I'll jump into some snow removal. I just want to try to answer any questions or any concerns that any of the neighbors have. Obviously, it'd be our responsibility to take care of the snow removal. We'd have to keep that stored on our own site. If the snow were to get too, overburdened like it would this year, like many of our sites, we do haul snow away. We budget that in, and when you have multiple units, you do have a budget in there to take care of the snow properly. Pay a professional with their dump trucks and skid steers to remove that. As far as the drainage, I know the drainage is a concern for many. Currently, the land, in my opinion, is probably draining inadequately the way it is, a big muddy lot there. So putting in proper draining, a professional civil plan, and working with the city to make sure we abide by all the rules there as far as the drainage. I can't tell you today, we haven't went into a full civil plan yet just due to not having it approved. So we will work alongside professional engineering and the city to make sure the drainage plan works properly. I know one of the concerns at the last reading at the hearing was we are not local. I do want to just touch on that just for a second. We're both from about 15 minutes south of here, Hamlin County. We're bedroom communities of Watertown. We shop here, we buy our vehicles here. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in Watertown. My grandparents are from here, my parents, my dad anyways, and I've grown up around Watertown my whole life. And I don't want to try to defend it so much, but I just want to let you know we do buy a lot of materials here. We use electricians here. We use all sorts of contractors locally. Just because every stitch of material doesn't transfer through Menards or one of the local lumber yards, I just want to point out that we do use concrete from here, and many different materials on our projects come from Watertown. So I could go on a long ways there, but I just wanted to point that out. And we spend, a lot of time in this town. Thoughts on density. Originally, this was an R2. Our thought was we could bring it in as a PUD with less density than an R2 would actually allow in the current zoning, which is approximately, in the R2 would be approximately 136 bedrooms, and this one is between 80 and 85 bedrooms, I believe. Connects to the walking path like we have on the drawing there, provides needed housing, protects neighbors with the PUD restriction. By putting that restriction on there, you know what you're getting with this. Helps provide some elderly housing, the tax base growth, 100% off-street parking, and them were kind of our main things, I guess. And I wanted to be here for any questions, so this is kind of what you get, and we'll try our best to execute this in a professional manner and be good neighbors as far as the site goes and future use of this property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further proponents? Any other proponents? I will now call for opponent testimony. Any opponents?
Good evening, Council. My name is Mike Odland. I live at 1279 Cherry Drive, where I've lived for the past 8 years. My comments tonight are reflective of me personally, not the neighborhood as a whole. You might hear from some other neighbors who have different opinions than me on this. I personally believe that our fight for what we want on this undeveloped land ended when the city became a petitioner in the PUD. You are essentially an investor in the development now with land, not monetarily, but with land. And there certainly is value in that for the developer. For if not for the 2 acres approximately that you're putting into this development, we wouldn't be here tonight. I'm still troubled by the fact that the city can arbitrarily decide to become a petitioner in a rezoning request by including its own land and proceed with a high-density development that the majority of residents in Eastwood don't want and we've never asked for. I think it does speak, though, to the eagerness of the council to get this land developed. I want to state one important fact on the record here tonight, and that is at no time did the developer reach out to me or any of the neighbors that I've talked with regarding this PUD, what it would look like. So you folks might talk about compromise as you get to a vote tonight, and maybe it is a compromise between the developers and the council. I don't see it as a compromise between the developers and the neighborhood because we've never been involved in any of the talks. And I know we're not obligated to be, but it would have been nice. Essentially, if you approve this tonight, we're being told we have to accept it whether we like it or not. I'm still annoyed by the fact that when the Planning Commission recommended approval of the PUD last month, and the city attorney essentially prompted them at the meeting to discuss any changes or concerns they had with the PUD, not a single question was raised, not a single question asked. So I'm imploring you tonight to pick this development request apart with a fine-tooth comb. You must have some questions about things like sidewalks, buffers, trees, tree species, parking, overflow parking, snow removal, snow storage, fencing, water drainage, the height of the buildings. It says in the city documents that the buildings will be 35 feet and under. It does not state that the fourplexes will be single story. That's what we're seeing on the screen, but that's nowhere in writing. Now imagine if you lived in an area where there was an undeveloped piece of land right behind your house. 6 high-density buildings that conform with R3 zoning were going to go up there. What questions would you have? Because that's me. I live directly behind this development. Glenn has been in my backyard to look at water issues at Cherry Creek. Mayor Holeen, you know where I live. You've seen how close I am in proximity to this development. So I and the rest of my neighborhood tonight want every question about this PUD answered, from aesthetics to the functionality of the development. Because, as I've been told repeatedly, what is in a PUD is what the developer has to build. No wiggle room. We don't want any surprises. We don't want to come back, if this is approved, in the future to complain that something has not been done correctly. It's not been done how we were told or how we were shown. Now, at the last council meeting, Mayor Holeen said something interesting toward the end of the meeting. I listened back to the tape today, so it's a quote. This is not misinformation. This is a quote. The mayor said the concerns on 14th Avenue are not unique to this development. They have been built up over a long time of mismanagement in Northeast Watertown. Mismanagement. The mayor's word, not mine. He went on to say there are truthfully roads and houses and expansion that have gone up there that truthfully should not have gone up without roadways ahead of time. Well, guess what? Now we're potentially on the brink tonight of approving a PUD with 80 to 85 bedrooms, 48 units, a 65-space parking lot, 6 buildings, and we've got a collector street up there that's a half road. It drifts in terribly in the wintertime. On occasion, it is blocked altogether. And just a couple of weeks ago, there was some heavy snow removal equipment up there that got stuck in mud on the north side of the road because it's a dirt shoulder up there, no curb and gutter. Now, it's my belief, and I've said this before, I'll say it again tonight, that infrastructure should go in before these projects, not after. That's just common sense to me. And we've been told that improvements to 14th Avenue are not included in the 5-year capital improvement plan. So, if what the mayor has suggested, that there has been mismanagement of development in Northeast Watertown, what are you going to learn from past mistakes that have been made up there? What are your conversations regarding this PUD going to sound like tonight? And what questions do you have for the developers and the neighborhood? And what answers will we get tonight? It looks to me like, based on the conversations from the last meeting, this is the direction this development is going to take. So you have to get it right. You've got one chance to get this development right. So I'm asking you tonight to drill down deep, get any concerns that you have addressed, please. And I think that's something that our neighborhood deserves. I want to say one other thing, just not a written comment, but I go back to something that Councilman Danforth said at one of the meetings months ago. He said when you go from R1 to R3, it's almost always problematic, and it should be. That's what we're dealing with. I'm R1. This development behind me is a PUD. It's 6 buildings that conform to R3. So get it right for me, and please get it right for the rest of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further opponents?
You're plagued with former council people tonight. I'm Nancy York, former council person from Ward A. I've been with this neighborhood, a cheerleader and champion for this neighborhood since the time that development went through. And they have had issues. The last 4 meetings, I've watched how the council and the neighborhood have reacted to each other and the developers. And everybody, for the most part, has been very respectful of each other. And that's what we expect. That's what we expect of you guys, because you're there representing this neighborhood as well as any other one. And so the PUD, I think, is probably a good idea, except the zoning is wrong. You've gone about it, in my opinion, without including the neighborhood. When the city decided to put some land into the game, that changed the picture entirely. That land belongs to everybody in Watertown. It doesn't belong to the city or the people that work up here. It belongs to everybody in Watertown. And that the whole group should have been up here, not at least a representative from their area. Their council person should have been here. Everybody should have been at the table together. They felt like they were very blindsided when they found out the city was throwing in some land just to accomplish their purpose. So I would just ask you to think about it, be fair. These people are good people. They started a development up there, beautiful homes, and they're just trying to protect the integrity of that neighborhood and the value of their own homes. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further opponents?
Good evening, Jim Woolen, 1348 22nd Street Northeast. I have some questions, some clarifications I'd like here. Under the setbacks portion of the written portion of this, it says something about that that this would conform to R3. I don't know if I don't have the actual reading here, but permitted uses and setbacks is the section. Shall match the requirements set forth by the City of Watertown, South Dakota ordinance for R3 multifamily. So my concern is not the plan that I see there, because what I see in reality is basically R2 with R3 behind it. So there is that little bit of a separation. It's conditional use R2. It's not just straight R2. But I think that that's something that would probably fly anyway. So in that respect, I don't have a lot of opposition to the plan as it is in the drawings. What I'm fearful of is what happens if this fails. If they pull out of it, something happens, their company goes belly up, whatever it is, the worst case scenario, this goes back to R3. Then we're right back to where we're at. Now, the new owner might have to build the same buildings, I don't know. What is the clarification of that?
We will take your questions and answer them. I'm trying to write them down as we get them, but
Okay.
Please continue with your testimony.
Well, like the other one is maybe just a request. The city's got some skin in the game here now, as has been mentioned. How about some trees in the game too? In that portion, at least that portion that the city is dedicating to this PUD, if not that entire greenway up there. It's been a long time coming and it still hasn't even been talked about. That would also help. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further opponents? Any further opponents? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action to approve the PUD. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Danforth. I will open it up for council questions and comments. I would like to honor the wishes of the opponents and have some of their questions asked and answered. So let's go with some of the last ones first. So trees. Now I know, because that was a question that I had at the last council meeting, I was asking about trees, and I did get confirmation, but Director Von Eye would like to have you talk about not only the question that I had, but the further question, what about trees in the drainage way, or rather the A1 or along that Cherry Creek. But I do know that because I asked this ahead of time, this PUD plan calls for 40 8-foot high trees, which far exceeds the minimum required, which is 11. So there was some concern in previous meetings as far as like putting trees, but just saplings. That's being addressed at least well, and then the number of trees as well. But Director Von Eye, if you want to speak to anything regarding trees.
Yeah, certainly, Mayor. Yeah, you're correct. The PUD, the Plan Unit Development, includes their requirement and commitment to install 40 8-foot tall trees. I want to talk briefly about trees in relation to a blocking mechanism for headlights. Shrubbery, trees, hedges are an approved mechanism to block headlights from shining onto adjacent residential zoning districts. That can also be accomplished by fencing. I think that'd be one point of clarity we could work out tonight with the applicant to see what the intent is there as far as how to block or diffuse the light pollution from headlights in the parking area. But at any rate, the plan shows 40 trees on the site. It would be on their site, not on any of the city property, as far as that would be concerned.
In regards to the trees, I believe that one of the questions had to do with the drainage. Is there any, what was the consideration of putting trees close to Cherry Creek or on that land? Does it help drainage? Does it hurt drainage?
Yeah, we would prefer and require, the plan would not include any tree installations on the city property, which would include the drainage area. We would not allow or prefer any trees in that area.
Okay. And why is that?
If we want city trees on city property, I think it'd be our best interest to manage the planting of those and coordinating that. I think that it being the main purpose of that property being for drainage and conveyance, the less obstructions we have in there, the better.
Thank you. There was another question asked near the end. What happens if this company fails? What happens to the land? It would not go to R3 because it has never been zoned R3, but what would happen to it?
Yeah, that's correct. So the PUD plan would stay in effect until a new owner or a new proprietor would want to do something different. Then they would have to apply to do so. This PUD under an R2 zoning district would stay in effect in perpetuity, just like any zoning district would, until somebody wishes to do something different with it. They have to come in, reapply. They could negate the PUD plan altogether and develop it R2. But that would have to be applied for and taken care of under the new ownership.
Okay, thank you. And council, I hope you bear with me. These are questions that were asked in opponent testimony, so I figured we should have them asked and answered. And so I'm not trying to take away any council deliberation or debate. I just want to be fair to the opponents. So I might not get every question, but I will get as many as I can. The setbacks. There was a question about the setbacks being R3 setbacks, and what effect would that have on this PUD?
Yeah, that's correct. The proposed setbacks are to meet the R3 zoning district setbacks. I guess I'm not sure what else you're looking for in an answer to that, but if you're wondering what they are, I could ask Brandy to cite them, but they would meet the R3 setbacks as per the PUD plan.
And I guess the question would be for the opponents, how would R3 setbacks satisfy the concerns they have with the PUD? I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think that would be what I was getting.
Brandy, if you could maybe cite the difference between the R3 and the R2 setbacks, that'd probably be a good starting point in helping answer any concerns for the R3 setbacks.
Yes, thank you, Heath. So it'll fall under the setback requirements for the R3 district, and because they will have over 12 dwelling units, they will go with actually greater setbacks than the R2 or the R1 district require. So you can see on here that the minimum lot width is 150 feet. The front yard setback is 30 feet as opposed to typically 25. 15-foot side yard setback when R1 and R2 are 9 feet. And then 25-foot rear yard, which is standard. And then overall height, it does not apply because they have a more restrictive covenant in their PUD plan that is limits them to 35 feet instead of 55.
Thank you. And Manager Hanton, you might as well stay there for a bit.
Mayor, if I could.
Yeah, Director
sorry to
Von Eye.
interject. I apologize. I have trouble keeping the numbers straight in my head at times. But Brandy, some of the R3s are actually more restrictive than the R2. Is that what you just cited, or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, and you can see that comparison here. I have the chart pulled up.
Meaning the building in an R3 setback will be set further away from the property line than what it could have been set in an R2 district, correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Manager Hanton, you had mentioned height. That was one of the questions as well from an opponent as far as height, or Director Von Eye as well. The question was, is there any assurance that the single-story R2 portion of this is going to be adhered by?
You okay with me answering that? So as far as their covenants go, it doesn't specify. It just says that no structure or building shall exceed 35 feet in height. However, that is like R1, the single family residential district, that is the maximum height restriction in our most conservative or restrictive zone. So it falls into what ordinance requires in an R1 district. So I don't think that it's necessary to limit it to be 1 story. They are showing that it would be, but technically an R1 home could be built to 2 stories, and that could be right next door to another single family home versus, in a PUD that will have greater setbacks than a traditional R1 zoning district.
Thank you. There was a question about drainage. I know we had already talked about that before, but and I know the proponents talked about snow. Director Von Eye, Manager Hanton, would you like to speak to the drainage in that area and how this might affect it?
Yeah, I'll provide just a brief history on the city's procurement of this land. Of course, happened some time back as this whole northeast side of town began to develop. We realized through the development review processes that we would need to preserve a certain tract of land for to sustain the proposed development at that time, and then also future development. So this tract of land that the city currently owns is held aside just for that purpose, and it's designed. There's a drainage study performed at that time, at least one, and the capacity in this area is taking into account all the future development that will feed any runoff to this area. And the channel is sized appropriately to convey the minor and major storm events. That's stormwater management lingo that we use as we review and require certain detention requirements of developers. But both storm events are accounted for in this channel, and that includes accounting for any development of this property, which would include it to the density that's being proposed to this PUD plan. Long story short, there's no concern from staff standpoint as we go through the development phase. If this were to be approved and we go through the permit review, we would require the appropriate detention on site and those measures that would help mitigate any further runoff concerns.
Thank you. I guess there was a question on sidewalks as well. As far as, is there going to be any? Should there be?
They will have a sidewalk, and the bike trail is shown to the north of this property, so we'll have to work with Park and Rec on. The developer is always obligated to install the 5-foot sidewalk, and that would be concrete. So then if we would do the difference of what a 10-foot asphalt bike trail, recreational trail would be, we'll work through those details when it comes time for their building permit issuance.
Director Von Eye, anything to add on that one?
Other than to expand on what Brandy had mentioned, so the sidewalk requirements for any developed land is in relation to sidewalk being required to the public streets, adjacent to the public streets. So in this case, of course, it'd be along the frontage of 14th Avenue. And that is the area that they are proposing to install sidewalk / bike path infrastructure in the right-of-way of 14th Avenue. To the question of whether there's any sidewalks internal, I'm only speculating. I'm not even sure if that was part of the concern or the question, but the plan is also showing sidewalks in front of the high-density units adjacent to the parking lot. Of course, that would facilitate pedestrians going from the parking lot to the high-density units.
Thank you. Our Manager Hanton, you had said that would be worked through in the process. That brings up one of the questions that was also asked, which is there any wiggle room in this? Because it is my understanding, and I could be wrong, but that tonight is not the end-all be-all. We would be basically approving the PUD, but the PUD is just the okay to then go into the proposal to actually bring this forward and show the actual plans and show everything, and then the developer would still be working with you. So this isn't, we're not voting on a picture. We're voting on a PUD with the restrictions that were brought forward. Is there any wiggle room? What would be the working through process?
A couple thoughts there. So if this were approved and the developer wanted to proceed, of course they'd start meeting with staff on how to get the permits issued. In that permit process, we would touch on all the normal building permit requirements that would come with any building permit. Because it's under an approved, because of what they're doing is under an approved PUD or would be under an approved PUD, staff referenced this plan in perpetuity. And so if they come in for one of these building permits tomorrow and then the other 10 years from now, this plan would still be referenced and checked off before those building permits would go out the door. There are included in city ordinance, there are some what are called minor adjustments to a PUD plan that staff can administratively review and approve. Brandy, I don't know if you're pulling those up now, you could cite what they are. But I think generally they're related to easements on the property, street configurations within the property, some things of that nature that wouldn't have a major impact. Then there's also a list of major changes to a PUD plan that would have to go back through the PUD approval process, which would mean it would go back to the Planning Commission and the City Council to approve any major changes to the plan.
I would like our city attorney, Lisa Carrico, to weigh in on major, minor changes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As Brandy had also pointed out in a previous public hearing on this, I can't remember if it was before the Planning Commission or before this council. In your own PUD zoning ordinance, they do provide how the amendments are to occur and what is minor and what is major. The major changes would be things such as a major street pattern, drainage way, detention pond location, public open space location, right-of-way widths, land use, maximum building height and densities, and the perimeter boundaries. So any of those changes, frankly, I believe have been presented in their initial plan. If for some reason, as you know, Public Works Director Von Eye has mentioned, let's say that they started and they wanted to do a major change, it would have to go back to planning, and they would have to, again, we'd go through the whole public hearing process. The minor changes are at the discretion of the city engineer. That is after the PUD plan has been approved. Things that would follow under the minor changes, which you guys have stated in your ordinance, is a change in local street pattern, street name, lot lines, the development phases, subdivision name, easements, or lot and block numbers. The other thing I would point out, which I believe is an intent to minimize any future major changes through the planning process, is remember too that all sections of Title 24 related to the subdivision of land must also be in compliance. So those applicable portions of Title 24 will also apply to the PUD plan and the permitting process. So there's what I'm going to call another catch to the permitting process and building process.
There's a follow-up question from Councilman Vilauer.
Yes.
Attorney Carrico or Director Von Eye, asking totally out of ignorance in the process here. Okay, you explained a major revision goes back through the Planning Commission, comes back to the Council. Assuming there's only minor, what you're defining as minor revision, do we see a development agreement or a plat come forward on that like we do typically with the development, or is that handled internally administratively?
This one will require a plat because this parcel is not formally platted to the extent that it needs to be for this development. I'll let Ms. Hanton speak to whether that falls under administrative plat or a administrative plats. We have to meet certain criteria. The ordinance allows for administrative plats in order to expedite the platting process. If again they're pretty routine, mundane plats that don't have significant impacts and aren't creating new right-of-way or things of that nature. But if other higher level things are triggered, that goes back to the normal platting process that would go before the Planning Commission and the City Council. And Brandy, I don't know which one this would fall under. If you could speak to that.
So when this property was annexed and zoned, it was never formally platted. So it will require a plat, but it will be an administrative plat because we will not be entering a development agreement for any infrastructure improvements for this property. So as Heath had alluded to, that when we have right-of-way improvements to be completed, utilities, streets, curb and gutter, that's when we enter a development agreement when it comes forward to council. But so since all of this will be private property improvements, and then there will be the sidewalk or rec trail, but that is one of the exceptions of public infrastructure that can be included, as part of the building permit application. And then just to expand on the whole amendments to the PUD plan and where the process stops and starts, when they apply for their building permit, if there are tweaks that need to be made but is following everything that the PUD plan states, like say that they're not meeting code for like the International Building Code or fire code, like one thing that we have to look into closer is fire access, like if there needs to be a turnaround, things like that, that could be a minor change, but it's not changing any density, height. It's not moving the buildings closer to the property lines with setbacks. So just things like that where if there ends up being those minor tweaks, because we also still need to meet the zoning ordinance, which is now the PUD, and everything that is in the PUD plan. And as Heath said, we will go and check off that everything is meeting what is approved for the zoning. But then we also have the next layers of needing to meet building code and our underlying ordinances too. So there's a lot of layers to it, but as far as everything that's a part of the PUD plan, that will have to be followed to a T. Yeah. I feel like there was something else I wanted to add to, but I slipped my mind.
All right, thank you. I apologize. I'm sure that I missed some of the questions. I know that I got a few of them. I was trying to do my best. I will now open it up for council questions, comments. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out, obviously, that the PUD is a unique zone for a reason, and that's why we're going through this process. But also, our staff goes through a lot of time and effort into this, not only any zoning request, but especially this. Going through the ordinance here, it starts with the staff review, and they meet as a DRT meeting where they have all the, everyone that is involved in a building site like this, including the fire and the police and the streets and engineering, and you could go down the list, and so they start there, they put in a ton of time, and then the PUD plan is presented and it has to meet certain criteria through our ordinance. Again, they make sure everything's included before it's even brought forward to us, and I just want to, this process is in place for a reason, and I think we have to follow it out of respect for our staff even, but obviously as integrity of our ordinance. So I want to say thanks to the staff for everything they've done, not only in this application, but all of them that have taken months, and some end up failing and some don't. So thank you.
Councilman Villauer.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple questions. One, Mayor, that I know it came up last time that didn't get asked now, but how was the 5 acres arrived at for a PUD requirement? Anybody, do we drill down into that?
I know Brandy was attempting to do some research on that. I don't know if she got to anything definitive. I don't know, Brandy, if you could speak to that. But
I did not look into other communities, but as far as our ordinance goes, when the PUD was adopted, as I've stated previously, it's really so that there is the components of a transitional zone that makes it unique to, and you need a certain amount of land area to make these transitions within the zoning district, and then also that you're not getting spot zoning, so that somebody comes with a compelling reason why what should be conventionally zoned R1 should be PUD, and it's 9,000 square feet. So it's really just creating a certain, and you have to just draw the line somewhere. So if it's 3 acres or 5 acres, I actually think that we could look at amending it to be a smaller land area, because 3 acres is still a decent amount of land when you're looking at what a typical minimal lot size is for an R1 district, which is 9,000 square feet. So I think that there's some opportunities still there, but it's just really drawing the line with creating some transition within a non-conventional district.
Okay. Also have a question, because it came up a number of times concerning traffic on 14th. I know, Director Von Ay, you've done some studies as far as what that street, what 14th Avenue is designed to carry, even though it's a half street, versus what the typical traffic is on a daily basis. Granted, it would increase if this is approved, but would you speak to those issues concerning traffic on 14th?
Yeah, I'll preface my comments with agreeing completely that a half-street section is not ideal. That is not how we administer development right now today as far as our regulations are concerned. So the fact that 14th is a half-street section for quite a ways, it's not ideal. I concur with that completely. What we do have out there is, I forget if it's 22 or 24 feet, but more than adequate enough width for 2 through lanes. And so I think I cited some information, might have been back in the R3 application actually, that a 2-lane street can carry up to, pushing 10,000 vehicles a day. And of course we can see that when we point almost anywhere in town where we have just 2-lane streets and there's a lot of volume on them, traffic volume. The volume on 14th currently is, if I remember off the top of my head, was 900 to 1,000 vehicles per day. So there's obviously adequate capacity on that 2-lane street to convey the traffic. What's not there is that north curb line. The clean and neat means for the city plows to get down there and to wing out that the muddy ditch area. Of course, it was referenced earlier. That is a fact that we have to deal with that. One of the things we are doing in the engineering division is working on building out these half-street sections. We actually have one that's under bid right now for this year's construction season. That's up on 16th Avenue Northwest. Of course, something similar happened there where there wasn't development in a certain area, and then all of a sudden there was, and so now we have a full street on both sides of a half street, and so that was one of our first ones we decided to go ahead and build out full width. There's means and mechanisms for us to do that. As a city, we have to front that cost, of course, but then we can file assessments back to the adjacent property owners, which is what we're working through on 16th Avenue. And we can't formally recoup that cost. We can file the assessment, but we can't formally recoup that cost until that property is annexed into the city. But still, nonetheless, it's a process we're working through to formally correct that. The reason I explain that is that's something this council could consider entertaining with 14th. If we wanted to make that a priority over other street projects in our subsequent capital improvement plans. We're coming up on the budget process here soon already for 2024. We'll have a CIP in there and some proposed street work for next year. If the council wanted to make this a priority, we certainly could and allocate those funds to build out the north half of 14th. But to summarize all that, as it sits today, is it ideal? No. But is it workable? Is there capacity there? Yes.
Councilman Villalver, any follow-up?
I might, but
Councilman Tupper.
Well, Glenn kind of stole my question there, but her answer for that question. So I'm just going to continue on with a little comment more than questions. Been a very interesting, how many months we've been working on this? Quite a bit. Been very, very interesting, and I want to thank the developers. I want to thank all the opponents to this because it's been generally pretty civil about things. There's been a few calls I've had that weren't very kind, but 99.9% of them have been very good. And I think it's a learning curve for the whole community that we can work together. We're not always going to make everybody happy, but we can work together to try to make the best of a situation work for all the people. And I know a lot of you people up in that area still don't think this is very good development, but I think it's the best use that we're ever going to see of this development. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for being very, very cordial about everything. And it's been a very good learning curve on the council also.
Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I want to start off with a comment, and then I got a couple of questions. And the comment is when we are presented a written document, when we hear testimony, and we see drawings, pictorial drawings in this case, if something's not stated in writing, but it's shown pictorially, because that's part of what we're using to look at and judge this for approval or not, does that pictorial serve as what is required within the PUD?
Yeah, I could have Brandy speak specifically to the list of required items on a PUD plan. Again, the plan, I like to think of it as two-part. You got the written narrative, and then you got the drawings. Typically, the 3D renditions that we see are not a formal part of the plan, but it's more of the plan view drawings that show the building footprint layout, the road, street, parking configurations, those kind of drawings. But there's a formal list in the ordinance that's required to be part of the PUD plan. Brandy, if you could touch on that briefly.
Well, let me tell you where I'm going with this. Is, if I heard correctly, one of the concerns was it doesn't state whether these are, the fourplexes are single story or double story. And if I heard you correctly, you're saying as long as they go up to the maximum 35 feet, it could get changed. That's not what I'm voting on. I'm voting on what I've seen up here, not in writing that they're single story yet, correct? Is that correct?
They also have a maximum density, though.
But density is space, not up.
Units, 80. Well, let's see what they have on that plan. But they do 48.
Okay, the point is
80 bedrooms.
What we're seeing is what we should get. That's what needs to be documented in a final document. If it doesn't end up that way, then I'm voting on something that, as I represent a lot of people that are sitting out here that we've talked about and that they're okay with, if that gets changed to where all of a sudden they're two-story fourplexes, then I've made my vote and the consideration for these individuals in error.
So go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off. The renderings aren't part of the PUD plan submittal. Those are for additional information to give it an exhibit. Now, I don't think it's the intention that they would be two stories. So that could be something that you guys would add, and I'm not sure what that looks like as far as an amendment. But if you want to specify that the fourplexes are single story, I think that is the intention, but if you want it locked in, it has to be in the PUD plan because the renderings are not a requirement. As Heath had referenced, this is the PUD plan requirements. They don't have to submit renderings. That was just to give a better description of what they're proposing in their plan.
So Brandy, I've shared on Teams one of the drawings. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but is part of the PUD plan. Are you seeing that on Teams there? Yep. Thank you. So what I was going to point out here is this plan view drawing that again shows the parking, the access. It also shows the structure footprints, and so that it does not indicate this level of number of stories, but it does show the footprint of the structures. That's what we have as a requirement and what they'd be locked into in this plan.
And what I'm saying is height is an issue. So my consideration on the commitment that I've made to the individuals that live in this area that are now in support of this, and I'm going to go there in a second, that height is an issue.
Yes, so I would agree that if this council wanted to not allow up to 35 feet, that should be specified.
Okay, how does that happen? How do we get, because I got some other items in here that have been shared with me.
Yeah.
What's the process for that happening?
Yeah.
For those things to get communicated and considered?
So, but one thing to just, I guess, reiterate is that in an R1 district, one neighbor can have a single-story house. The next neighbor could have a house up to 35 feet. So I do think that it might be more restrictive than it would need to be, just because you could have a neighbor that's 9 feet off the property line. This is going to be 25 feet from any R1 district and not even adjacent to it, but it has a lot greater buffer. And when a neighbor right next to you could be up to 35 feet in an R1 district.
I think Councilman Tupper has something on this subject.
Just a quick question to that. You have drawings for parking, and that's allowed for that's what you have in your drawings for the single story, correct? So if they were to try to build a fourplex instead, you would not have adequate parking, correct?
That is correct.
So that kind of simplifies that area, so.
Yeah, good point.
Back to you, Councilman Danforth.
No,
Sorry
it's not changing those. Those are fourplexes, as they're shown. They are single-story fourplexes.
Yeah, otherwise they would need more off-street parking.
Okay, I'm not talking about making them into eightplexes.
Yeah.
I'm saying those need to stay single-story fourplexes, or I'm not voting for it. That is what, I don't care what happens in R1. We're talking about what we want in order to allow a PUD. So what happens in R1 or R2 really doesn't matter. This detail is what establishes what we're going to agree to and require.
Right.
And there was no discussion at all prior to this that there could be any consideration for those to be two-story at any point in this conversation. So all I'm saying is, and I'm not sure whether it's even appropriate for me to talk to the developers or not, but I'll just say this. You guys need to, in my opinion, it needs to be stated in there what you're going to do. And these people out here want to go with what they've been shown and told, and that is single-story fourplexes. Okay? Now, can I add a few other items on here as to what other people had suggested they'd like to see some possible changes on?
I could go with you there. I was wondering if Manager Hatton had anything. Did you want an answer to that question?
So
In there. I'm not sure why it wouldn't be put in there.
the height has been a part of this PUD application since Plan Commission, that it's stated that no structure or building shall exceed 35 feet in height. So that was open of whatever the structures were, that, and that's what, I mean, that's the minimal, that's the maximum height in any of our districts. So we don't restrict anything more than that.
Okay. I'm going to disagree with you again, Brandy, and I'm trying to be polite here, but I'm trying to use common sense.
Mm-hmm.
We have had discussions from day one that 35-foot maximum pertained to the three larger multi-story buildings. It had nothing to do with the duplexes or fourplexes. Never. It's always been communicated.
And
so whatever is written in there is in generic terms, then it shouldn't have been pictorially described and shown to us as something different. So all I'm saying is, and the rest of the council can say what they want, but I'm not voting for this unless it is restricted on those fourplexes or duplexes, whatever they end up being, to single story. And I'm going to ask, at that point, I'm going to ask my constituents to not support it either, which they are now supporting. I want to make a comment on that, because it is important to me, and everybody knows I was against the R3 for a lot of reasons. I've had the opportunity since our last meeting. I believe I've had 12 individuals contact me, 11 by phone, 1 by text. The 1 by text still opposed the PUD. The other 11, with my specific question, after answering questions, hearing their input, I specifically asked them, how do you want me to vote? And they all said, with the exception of one that texted me, said they want me to vote for the PUD. But now that's based on what we've talked about, things we've seen, things that we know have been verbally communicated and committed to. So I'm extremely happy with, number one, the people that called me, took the time to do that. We had great conversations, and I enjoyed it. It opened up some very good dialogue, good questions. And they are in support of this PUD, but not with two-story, 35-foot high, whatever it could end up being. I don't know what it could be, fourplexes. You know, we need to live up to what we are being shown and what it looks like we've been committed to. Mayor, can I ask a couple questions of Heath?
I'm just wondering if you want an answer to, or more extrapolation upon that point. I mean, if you don't,
well,
that's fine.
I'm not sure who's going to answer that. I'm going to ask the developers, are you willing to commit to those being single level? Okay, there's our answer.
Okay, I will ask you to come forward and say it on record and not just nod in the back of the room. I'm just saying, I can't allow that.
I agree.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think that maybe, I don't know if you could break out the restriction. I don't know, at this point, we'd probably go back a few months, and that would be less than ideal to go back through the process again.
Yeah.
Would not want to do that, obviously. We do want to build single-story buildings like is shown, and that's our plan. With the footprint outlined of where them fourplexes are, if we were to go to two-story with them, and then only have our maximum unit count or bedroom count, basically the second story would have to be empty. We couldn't put anything up there because we'd run out of. But nonetheless, we do not want to build two-story buildings there, and we will guarantee that we're going to build one single-story buildings there. Yes, just like it's shown.
Okay. Yep. And that will be in the writing within the PUD document then. Okay. Thank you.
As long as
the way to get there, apparently.
Mayor, could I?
Please do.
So, and that's great that the developers are willing to do that. So I think that would have to be an amendment with the motion. We'll at least touch on that. But I was just reiterating as far as what has been proposed since it's been at Plan Commission for the PUD plan, and apologize if there was miscommunication about the purpose of the renderings. The renderings are not a requirement. We go off of what the PUD plan, which it has stated that from the beginning. So I was just making that clear.
Thank you very much. Director Von Eyde, did you want to say something on that? Or City Attorney Carrico? I saw you two confabbing over there.
Well, what I'm trying to accomplish here, Mayor, is to address Councilman Danforth's concern without having to take this PUD back to the Planning Commission. I'll be frank. I'm not sure anybody in this room wants to see that happen. So an amendment to this plan, what I would call maybe a point of clarity to this plan, would be to add language in it that does restrict the height of those fourplexes to a single level. And if we look at that as a point of clarity, that is essentially affirming what the Planning Commission already approved because they saw single level fourplexes. I think that we can forego having to go back to the Planning Commission and then back to the council for all subsequent approvals.
City Attorney Carrico, would that be your interpretation?
Yes, I'm comfortable with that.
Then the question would be, in my mind, because 35 feet being the R1, what is the definition of single story? Is it 10 feet? Is it 15 feet? Because we might be putting a restriction upon the PUD that no construction firm could abide by. Yeah, I mean, a single level, single story. I mean, because if it's a single story, what is a story? I mean, I've heard it defined as 12 feet.
Yeah,
so
Mayor, if I could.
I'm just saying, we don't, unless we have that definition already.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but of course you'd have to consider the pitch of the roof and the peak of the roof in that height restriction. So aside from your 10 to 12 foot story height, you'd have the roof taken into account on top of that. I'd have to defer to our building official and common building practices and what the overall height of a single story structure would commonly be. I don't know that off the top of my head.
But single story, Councilman Danforth is single story as that.
That's what I've asked for, is the single story units. I have not asked for a given height.
Okay.
It's been single story.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think the definitions cover that too.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we're not going to get called on this again.
Yeah. And I apologize, but it procedurally all along, I've always assumed that's what presented is what we're getting, and that's what I've been basing all my discussions on and all my decision making on. So that's why that's really, really important to me.
And And that's why we always have the developer is the one presenting the renderings. We haven't included it in the agenda packet except for this last one because it was presented at the first reading. So we wanted to have that for more public information. But that's why we intentionally, we don't include the renderings when it's first presented, so it doesn't get misconstrued like that. And we leave that up to the developers because it's not required, but if they want to share additional information to help give more illustration, whatever, I can't think of the word, but so that they can better describe their plan.
Well, I think we're past that hump. We've already got it that it's going to be a revision or clarity within the document that states that. Mayor, if I can, a couple other questions. These are questions that were asked of me. Is the developer confined to the use of their land within their lot lines? They can't, for anything other than the use of that land for an accumulation to the 5 acres, they cannot use the city land for any purpose. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I thought. There was mixed feelings on whether they wanted fourplexes or duplexes. Not a big issue one way or the other. I did hear a few comments which I think are reasonable, is that if we're going to have the fourplexes in the long stretch of them buildings, the individuals would like to see some kind of a breakup of the structure itself and the roof line so that it's not just one long, I don't know if that's possible. That's just something to consider and look at in your discussions afterwards. Let's see here. The question was asked me about what happens with outside storage. Okay, you got apartments, you got that, and so people may not, because there aren't any garages on here other than at the fourplexes, correct? So what happens when people have bikes and trikes and toys and dog kennels and whatever they all got? How is that managed on this property? How does that get looked at? I don't know. Is that a question that they can answer? Is that something that you guys got to address?
I would prefer the applicant address that if we could.
Okay.
So we have some similar buildings like this up by the pool in Watertown. Then also in Brookings, we have 2 different developments with very similar buildings with no garages. The property manager does have some pretty strict rules as far as leaving stuff out. We do put in bike racks, professional bike racks that we buy and construct, and heavy duty bike racks. As far as dog kennels, things like that, they're not allowed to have a dog kennel outside of their structure at all. In the townhome type of units, they have a fenced in yard there. You know, if they do have pets, it's a little more pet friendly maybe with the backyard there. The buildings are pet friendly in most cases. Mills Property Management does a really good job as far as every now and I drive the properties usually once a week, and we own a number of units, myself or someone on staff, and look for things that are more common, like a sofa or a mattress or something like that. That's probably more common to be thrown out when someone moves out. So we try to keep a pretty close eye on that. You know, that'll be hanging out of the dumpster or something. We want a professional looking site there. But yes, currently with no garages there, it does restrict some stuff, and so it usually ends up being a single or a couple, or, you know, not so much stuff in the apartment style units, and maybe more of the families or something in the townhome units where they have garage and storage. So I know I don't have the exact answer for you there. I guess I just want to tell you what it's been from our experiences. But
I do know that is a concern to know what all could be out there. You know, we all know what individuals and maybe young families, they can have a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And the question is where does that go? So you're saying
they'd have to rent a storage unit in most cases. Yeah, the property manager monitors that, and many times they'll have a storage unit somewhere in town, help keep storage units full, I guess. But
okay. You guys might want to stay there for a second.
Okay, that's fine.
Here's a question I have. If this is a phased project, okay, let's just say you're going to build one of the, what are they, 8 plexes, 12 plexes?
12s.
12. You're going to build one now, and maybe it's a year before you do the other one. When does the screening all go in? Is there a requirement as to when that is? Does that go in right away?
I believe it says within a certain amount of time of the final occupancy issued or.
Okay, so what does that mean? The final occupancy, is that the last structure or the last time that, the last unit rented? What does that mean?
So the final occupancy is based on a per structure occurrence, per building permit occurrence. Each one of these buildings would be permitted separately, and the occupancy certificate at the completion of the building is on a per building basis. So if they build one building, the screening associated with it would have to be standalone and installed in compliance with the ordinance in reference to that
Do we have
duration
the-
within that certificate of occupancy.
Okay, because my guess is you're gonna have parking lot, whether the whole thing's done or whether it's partially done, but we're gonna have lighting issues that we're gonna have to deal with. Is there any way at least from the tree standpoint, that we can require those to go in up front? Once the site is prepped and ready, whatever that is, that the trees go in and they go in up front, or at least before the occupancy of the first building?
So, Heath, are you okay with me? So in order for us to issue even one permit, one building permit for, say they do 112-plex, they have to make sure that they have sufficient parking for the off-street parking requirements. And then also because the PUD states that they will have 48-foot tall trees, those would have to be installed before we would issue a certificate of occupancy for them to even start renting out the units.
Okay, so right up front has to be done.
Yep.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Probably not like the first thing, just so you understand. Obviously we've got site work, streets,
Right.
any curb and gutter and hard
But before
surfaces.
occupancy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct,
yeah.
And we'd want to get them in as soon as possible, but we have to obviously get the landscaping and everything done before we start plopping trees and all that, so.
I know we've talked about 48-foot trees. Are we defining what kind of trees those are? Are they evergreen type trees, or,
We
you can
ha-
have an 8-foot elm that's this big, and it'll be 30 years before it shades anything.
We've had a lot of luck with different maple trees, some fast-growing trees. I guess we'd have to rely on our landscaper to help us with that, but unless the city has some requirements on transplanting in some spruce or evergreens or something like that.
Mayor, I call a question.
Motion was made to call the question. Is there a second? Motion was made and seconded. All those in favor of calling the question? Actually, I'm going to call a roll call on that. If you want to end debate and go immediately to a vote, you're going to vote yes. If you do not want to do that, you're going to vote no. Call the roll.
Okay, Bueller. Danforth.
No, because I want my constituents' voice to be heard.
Councilman, it's just a vote.
I said no.
Helene.
No.
Paulson. Shetty. Did we lose him?
No, sorry, no.
No, okay. Tupper? Vilhauer? Okay, that motion.
Motion fails. Okay, we're back to discussion. Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. First concern is assessing undeveloped land. That's been poorly done in the past, as I've been part of that. And I do have major concerns over that. And I realize that there's been more research done into that, but still, not only does it put a burden on that land going forward to be developed, keeping track of it, and when there's staff turnover and everything, that creates a lot of concern for me. I get why we would want to complete roads, but that does I have a lot of concerns over that. And I just want to point out that we are not God, and I feel like we have a God superiority complex going on right now, where we are asking too many questions that it's not our function. We have to trust our staff. There's a process in place. Every one of these questions have been answered by staff or within the plan that's currently existing. And I get where we're going with this, but there's a lot of questions that is not our function as a board. And I do have great concerns over where we're headed with this.
Councilman Tupper, actually, did you still want to say something? No. Okay, Councilman Bueller.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll respectfully disagree with Councilman Paulson in that regard. This is a time for questions. This is a PUD, and this PUD is designed to be a covenant between the city and the developer. And so we do need answers to some of those questions. Some of those questions were brought forth by Mr. Odland at the beginning of the meeting. So I think it makes sense for us to ask those questions and ask what the processes are to implement those changes to this request. I think that's very prudent in this discussion. Respectfully, Councilman Paulson, but I just want to make a few comments. That's one of the reasons I voted no on the to call the question. I think there's a need for this type of housing in our community. I do. I think this is something that we would benefit our community for workforce housing, for other opportunities for people to live in Watertown. I think we have gone through, the 3 times we've talked about R3, and my concern would be if we don't do something tonight, this is going to come back again, and maybe again, and again. I think there's been a decent compromise in this whole situation. I don't think it's going to be obtrusive as far as views go. I think there is and I know we've said we don't like to transition to a multi-house development from an R1, but I think there's substantial amount of space in between these things. I will say that one of my big concerns with this development is 14th Avenue, and I think it will support it. And something I've dealt with over the years and all my years of planning, we typically hear that it's going to be an issue with density for traffic on the roads. And folks, I have never seen that. When we've allowed it, I have not seen that in my history as an issue moving forward. The road is not ideal. There's no question about that. But I do think there may be some remedies for that. I do have to say that I would have to agree with the fact that typically your infrastructure should be in place before you make your development. But I will say, and we've had this, I've seen some discussions with our engineering department about maybe prioritizing some of these roads. This may be a road that we would put at a higher priority so that we could get it widened to accommodate the traffic a little bit better. If nothing else, maybe there's some temporary things we could do to the shoulder on the north side of that road. But I don't see density as being an issue. I'm glad we dealt with the height restrictions because I know that was a concern with everyone. And I think Mike was right in bringing it up on that one story. I think that's important that exists on the footprint, not just we're going to say, okay, the fourplexes are going to be single story. I think it's got to be single story on the footprint where those are located. That to me, I think that maybe needs to be in that language. But I think this is a good compromise from where we started with R3. I really do appreciate all the work that our staff has had to go through to make this happen. I hope our developers appreciate that. And we do appreciate the fact that we've got folks that want to come in here and develop. But something's going to happen to this property. I think this is probably the best opportunity for us, this PUD. So those are my thoughts, and I will support this evening.
Councilman Schutte.
Thank you, Mayor. On this, the details in these questions, even earlier in the week when I was in Watertown still, visiting with one of the neighbors in that neighborhood, the question of the height of the buildings was brought up to me as well, and that is a good point that we needed to work through. So I'm glad we took the time to work through the height of the house of those structures. Just so some of those details are needed as well, even from trees, and those are good questions because it makes a difference. I don't know, being the neighbor on the south side there, having to rake a bunch of maple leaves in about 20 years, that'd be interesting, huh? So with north winds in the fall. But anyway, so as far as the details we're working through, I'm glad that we have the questions from the neighborhood. I'm glad we have questions from council to work through this process, and that's helping me make my decision in this compromise to move forward with the PUD. So thank you.
Thank you. Council, any further questions or comments? Councilman Beeler just said something at the end of his comments that were also addressed by the proponents. I know that there was the comment made at a previous meeting that implied that Watertown does not want anyone that is not local, 100% local. I don't think that was the intent of that comment. I don't think that's the intent of the neighborhood. It is not the intent of the council to drive away anyone who wants to come in and invest money in our community. I also would say that regarding, you were talking about, material bought in Watertown. Well, the thing is, anything that you buy is taxed in Watertown, so Watertown is going to benefit off of any building that is done here. So that's one thing that I don't think a lot of people get. So I just wanted to say I don't think that was what the person said. I know that you had mentioned that, and so I am suspecting that that stayed with you. I can't speak on behalf of all of Watertown, but the people that I know, we don't want to get the perception that we don't want outsiders in any way. So thank you very much. I would also like to say thank you to the council, to the staff, to everyone on both sides who have been willing to talk, listen, and work through this process. With that, I will call the roll. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed say nay. No, I thought I said roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Sorry. I'm like, if I stop?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, it's still a roll call vote.
Okay.
If you want to vote yes, you'll say aye when your name is called.
Okay, here we go. Bueller.
Yes.
Okay, Danforth.
Yes.
Pauline.
Yes.
Paulson. Shetty.
Yes.
Tupper.
Yes.
Billhauer. Yes. Motion carries.
Motion carried. Item G? Yes. Item G is a second reading of Ordinance 23-05, an amendment to Chapter 19, Curb Space Reservation of the Revised Ordinances of the City of Watertown, removing Chapter 19-0410, Curb Space Reservation. Public Work Director Heath Von Eye, please tell us more. Actually, Heath, as everyone leaves, council, if you want to go grab a pop, go grab a pop. We are not taking a recess, but if you wanted to grab a pop, do it and come right back. Okay. Public Works Director Heath Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure who stacked the agenda tonight, but I'm going to be writing a strongly worded letter to somebody. I just don't know who. No, all kidding aside, this item was supposed to be on the last council meeting. I'll apologize. It slipped to get on the second reading then. So it's before the council tonight for second and final reading to amend our ordinances, Chapter 23-05, or excuse me, this is Ordinance Amendment 2305 to Chapter 1904, and it's related to reserving curb spaces and for adjacent property owners' use specific to their business or their function on their property. As council recalls, we've gone through a series of applications and issuance of reserved curb spaces over the past few years. It was kind of initiated through COVID, when we were coming out of COVID and people were starting to get out and about all the more, and not wanting to, to directly enter into a place of business, but still wanted to be a patronage to business. So we had some applicants come forward wanting some reserved curb spaces for that effect. Since then, it became apparent that the council was faced with having to pick what I've been calling, just in my language, winners and losers of who gets a space in front of their store and who does not. So we wanted to try to address that through an ordinance amendment, and actually what that came down to was what's drafted and before the council this evening is to eliminate the option of having reserved spaces. And with that, that's my summary, and I'll stand by for any comments or questions.
Thank you very much. Technically, I'm not required to give a public hearing, but I know at least one gentleman has patiently waited for a long time for his ability to speak on this, and there's no way I'm going to take that ability away from him. So thank you very much for waiting. Please identify yourself and who you're representing.
Hello, Mark Buller with Needlework Sewing Center and Pitmaster Supply, 216 East Kemp. I don't want to repeat a whole lot of what I've already said in the prior council meeting, but I guess just asking for the ability to, in my opinion, exist as a business because of the items that we sell are quite heavy. I've talked to Councilman Shuddy quite a couple of times about maybe if there be an option for maybe a study of my business, maybe a permit based on the weight as it pertains to dollars coming out of my door. Because if you look at a, $19.99, for a 40-pound bag of pellets, a lot of my dollars are generated by weight. So if that would be a qualifier, if it had required city time to incorporate that into a means of being able to do something, and there would be a fee associated with that, and then maybe a lesser renewal fee from years down the road. I'd be open to that because I want to stay in business. It's pretty expensive to close or move, even if I were to try to go anywhere else. So, I guess I'm just laying that before you. Don't know what y'all can do in this setting. I know you have kind of a mindset to do away with it. I know Empire Pete's actually permitted to get a sign and was told that they were going to be done away with and don't bother. So, they're feeling the pains of that, and along with other mom and pop business challenges. But spoke with them, and that was kind of what their rundown of it was. So I guess I'm here at your mercy and like some latitude if I could.
Thank you very much. I know our city manager, Mac, has just something to say about that.
Thank you, Mayor. And Public Works Director Von Eyck can chime in more eloquently than I'm probably going to muddle through this, but specifically related to your concerns about weight and capacity to carry things in. One thing that we have discussed internally, which likely would not require any additional changes to the ordinance, are simply to designate loading and unloading zones curbside. We happened to be in Deadwood this past week for a conference and saw some signage that made a lot of sense. And that's something that we're looking into that we think would be beneficial, not just for you, but for other places that would have the same challenges that your business might with large equipment, that kind of stuff. What we try to weigh from the staff perspective in giving recommendations to the council is not necessarily creating winners and losers in the parking game. And that's what we felt that the specific reserved curb spaces was doing, and at some point the entire block is going to be taken with reserved spaces. So if we can be intentional about those loading and unloading zones to meet the need that you're talking about, I think that that's very beneficial, not just for you, but for other businesses, but then also helps us maintain the integrity of public parking. So just as an FYI, that's something that we're reviewing and would likely be able to implement.
If you get a good idea like that every time you go to Deadwood, we're going to send you every other week. So, Public Works Director Von Eye.
Yeah, I think to the concern that's raised here tonight, I got a few different thoughts on this. A lot of it in line with what Manager Mack just stated, but I think the interpretation of the current language is really what led us down this path, got us where we are today. The language is specific to unloading or loading of passengers or merchandise or materials, and then later in the chapter it references a loading or unloading zone. So I think that language could be construed to mean exactly what the business owner before us this evening is referring to. I think that it, because of COVID, got interpreted to mean something a little bit different at the time, and it helped fill a need at that time, so that was great. It meant grabbing a cup of coffee or grabbing a plate of food to go, and we made use of it in that capacity as we were coming out of COVID. But if we were to look at the terms in this section ordinance and then look at our definitions, a loading space is a space accessible from a street, alley, or way, any building or onto a lot for the use of trucks while loading or unloading merchandise or materials. I think the spirit of what was here maybe was exactly what is being questioned right now tonight. You know, a loading zone, a truck unloading merchandise on a wholesale basis, if you will, to be used for retail purposes later on. So I definitely think we could clean this up in a way that and implement something that perhaps we put 15-minute loading zone signs up in a few select locations on Kemp Avenue, and would help address some of these concerns.
Thank you very much. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the amendment.
Second.
Motion made by Councilman Villauer, second by Councilman Tupper. Open it up for conversation. Councilman Tupper.
Mr. Von Eye, you did say Kemp Avenue?
Yes.
I would hope you would include the whole downtown district, because not all businesses are on Kemp Avenue.
We certainly could.
Yep. I just want to clarify that so we don't just. You might want to move around over on Maple, then you're SOL.
Well,
so.
I guess, and I guess my concern isn't, my freight coming in. It's my customers. I'm here for my customers, because that without them, I'm useless. So, I have no concern. I mean, truckers have no problem stopping in the middle of the street and dropping my stuff off. I don't have any problem with arranging for them to stop at another location and transport it myself. It's that I can mitigate. But being able to get customers in my door is what I need to do in order to stay in business. So my wife even said, well, maybe we can have them come around back. Well, that's a shared gravel parking lot with studios on 3rd that you can't rely on, navigating someone to back into your back alley access and negotiate your stairs to come in. So it's this is really just about being able to get customers. My customers just in these last couple of weeks have I've told them, they're going to possibly do away with these signs, and they're almost abhorrent about it because they're carrying a 45-pound sewing machine that's this big, or I'm carrying it for them, and to go half a block down when you're, in the advanced years, just it isn't it's not a good business plan. But the business plan has changed drastically when we lost 100 spaces across the street for tenants and so forth. So part of what I'm here for is largely of actions that have come about, by council action.
Councilman Tupper?
I would question the fact that we want to go any farther than a loading zone. If we're making this for people to make deliveries, many communities do not allow deliveries off of Main Street. They make them through alley or back entrance. Now, if you're going to open up a loading zone, you're going to have, or unloading zone, I should say, you're going to have a semi or something parked right in the middle of Main Street, and he's going to sit there for 15 minutes. So I think it's try to make it more convenient for the consumers and you. But like I say, a lot of communities, I know Brookings did business in Brookings for many years. If you had to wheel it halfway around the block, you parked in the alley and you wheeled it halfway around the block. That's the price of doing business in Brookings. So, and I know there's other communities the same way.
Councilman Schutte.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Mr. Bowler's concern and comments. When we voted for the temporary parking spots during the COVID season, I voted for that, for the temporary side of it, because there were concerns, I think, for many on the council on how we were to move forward as far as more and more spots wanting to be reserved. So I understand why we're moving this direction to kind of reset, if you will, this process. And there is challenges. I agree. You know, downtown, that's a great idea that City Manager Mack and Public Works Director Von Nuys brought up. I visited with the engineering department last week about Mr. Bowler's thought on the weight and loading, hauling merchandise like that. And so that may address some of that a little bit, as far as that goes. But I get his concerns too with certain folks being able to park, closer into proximity of his business. We are working on some other scenarios downtown and trying to work these details out. And so it's, however, moving forward, it's going to be hard to just vote for, to have just one or two people be able to have favor in this area. Although Mr. Bowler may have a good case, to have a parking spot, I do appreciate his concern there. But the challenge is really, how do we do that for one or two people? And that's where I know his idea with the weight thing, the loading dock would help with that to some degree, or loading this parking spot. But anyway, so that's just, I appreciate some of these thoughts and as we're working through this process. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I do support this in general, although I do get Mr. Bowler's concerns, definitely. But the only way, I guess, my question is, if how this is worded is it's getting rid of those spots, but then we're going to put spots back. I guess I have a question over getting rid of certain language and then putting reserved spots kind of back in, albeit loading, unloading. But that's my only question on that. And that's the only way I would support it, is if we do go down that route, that we're still going to have load and unload spots meant for the consumers, but not just at the ends, but near the alleys as well.
Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to understand this, and I don't know that everyone has the same idea about what we're talking about here for loading and unloading. I think my understanding is that this would be intermittent locations throughout the business district that might work for a few different business locations, and it would be a slot where vehicles, cars, pickups, that kind of thing, could stop, load, and unload. And there'd be a restriction on the amount of time that they could be in that space. I want to make sure that that's what we're looking at doing, and if that's the case, then the public needs to understand that's what we're looking at doing.
Councilman Villauer.
Thank you, Mayor. All due respect to the businesses that have taken advantage of this, I voted against every one of these when they came upon us in the beginning. I'm in favor of seeing it repealed. I think we replace that with something else. We're opening up a can of worms again. That's going to cause confusion, enforcement issues, etc. I'm not in favor of that. I'm in favor of repealing this, and I'm sorry, but that's my stance as far as nothing beyond that.
Councilman Tupper.
All due respect for you, sir. You talked about a weight situation. Chief Toomey, do you guys carry scales in your squad cars? That would be an ordinance that's just totally unenforceable. I mean, we've got enough of those on the books without writing more of them, because we can't rely on the police department to enforce that. So,
any further discussion, council? Any further discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the revision or amendment. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. Please call the roll.
Okay.
Mayor, please, if you please, I want to understand what.
To revise, to repeal this ordinance, so to take away the reserved parking space, you say aye or yes.
Thank you.
Point of clarity again?
Yep.
Has nothing to do with
Yeah, it has nothing to do with zoning.
the nature or thoughts of putting these other signs. That's just purely at face value.
Yep.
Okay, are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. Bueller,
Aye.
Danforth,
Yes.
Helene,
Aye.
Paulson, Shetty,
Yes.
Tupper,
Aye.
Vilhauer. Motion carries.
Item H is the second reading of an amendment to Chapter 703, City Council Procedure of the Revised Ordinances of the City of Watertown. Heath, we're going to give you a break and go to our City Manager, Amanda Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the second reading of amendments to the council procedure ordinance. This is largely cleanup language. As Lisa and I were reviewing a few things, we recognize that it probably was time to have some discussions about cleaning this up. A couple of main things is rule number 4, which is outlined, identifies the quorum. After roll call, if the quorum is present, the agenda shall be approved. It takes away specific listing of what's in the agenda and the order that the agenda needs to be. It's now the manager's responsibility to create that agenda and put it together. Additionally, changing language around council committees. We no longer have the Finance and Public Works Committee, but this also gives the mayor, with council approval, the ability to create standing committees if they like, but those committees are not ordained by ordinance, if you will. So with that, I would stand by for any questions, and I know Lisa will be available to help answer as well.
Thank you. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the amendment. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any discussion, Council? Councilman Danforth.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a brief discussion today with the mayor and city attorney. I'm just going to throw this out there. It's an item that I have thought should be included and necessary in our voting format procedurally, and that is to have a rotating change of a starting vote. I've seen it personally, Mayor, and I've seen it with other committees that we have issues there. I have not seen it with this body that we're currently here, but I have seen it at previous times being on the council with other individuals. So I would like to see added that we have a rotating start of each roll call vote, just for consideration and discussion.
Thank you. Just to be clear, that would be a separate proposal. I mean, you can amend it right now. That would be a lot of different conversation. But, I mean, yes, what I'm saying is your idea is noted and not dead. I mean, definitely be brought up. But it's not in this right now, so that could be added, but it would take either an amendment tonight or a separate action at a different council meeting. City Manager Mack?
I think just to provide some clarity as to why we don't currently rotate, it's because this council and previous councils have adopted Robert's Rules of Order in its entirety, and Robert's Rules says that the votes shall be alphabetical and the mayor votes last. So yes, there is a way to amend that. I just wanted to give some context as to why we are doing it the way we're doing it currently.
Councilman Tupper?
She just answered my question, because I think I brought that up to somebody, or I'm sure it wasn't at a council meeting, but I believe I may have brought that up to City Manager Mack a long time ago. I think it would be a good idea to to, where we got to change that. This is not the time or place, or it's not into this ordinance, but yes, I would agree with that, so.
City Manager Mack?
Actually, it is in this ordinance, because these are council procedures. So if this were, you have a couple of options. First, you can direct staff to bring an ordinance amendment, which would require another reading of this, which is fine, to include language around the roll call vote. Or you can take action on this, potentially approve it, and then we would just bring a subsequent action at a later date, whichever you prefer. If you go the latter route, it might actually take longer because you'd have to do a first reading and then a second reading rather than just another second reading. So however you would like to proceed, we will accommodate accordingly.
City Attorney Carrico.
Thank you, Mayor. Just so that you kind of have it in your mindset, in your hopper, if you choose to just adopt the amendments as they're currently stated, and then basically direct us to add the other one later, that would also give council time. I'm not saying you need to. It's only if you want to. If there was something else that you did want in the council procedures, we could piggyback that with the other one about the voting lineup and do any other changes that you may want.
And I guess from my perspective, there's a couple different ways we could do this, and that's one of the reasons why I would like to at least have some time, because we could either change the rule we could change the ordinance that we automatically follow Roberts. We could change the ordinance to say that we will do a rotating vote. So we could also change the rule to give currently it is theoretical that the presiding officer could call the roll in any way that he wanted, but it would need the approval of the entire council, and that would be a cumbersome procedure that we'd have to do at every meeting. So there's a couple different ways we could accomplish this. And as far as changing the ordinance, I guess I would like to have more time to see if it had repercussions on other ordinances. I'm definitely not opposed to this, and I know that on my entire time on council and mayor, it has been an idea for anyone early in the alphabet. But I don't think anyone late in the alphabet. Is against it. So, I think it could be argued to be an issue of fairness, and I'm okay with that. Councilman Danforth?
This has been something that I have talked about for years, and we just have never gotten to this point, which I'm glad we've gotten here. This isn't an emergency. So whatever is deemed the best way to handle this, to get it as part of our procedural voting, however that is, I don't care. I just think it needs to be in there so that we do that. It is a fairness issue. It is in my opinion. So I don't care how it's done. I really don't. So somebody can decide how that is, what the best way is, and we should just move in that direction. It doesn't matter to me.
Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I agree 100%, not because I'm Bueller. But no, I've also thought this over the years, and we have done this in the past on occasion. I think we used to do it on Planning Commission once in a while. But no, I agree 100%. But tonight, what I want to know is what's the easiest for everybody to get this done? Should we vote to make it easy? Would we just vote for the change tonight and then revisit it?
I would think so.
Okay,
but
that's cool with me. Thank you.
I would say I know that there are some ideas that I have that as far as just I think improvements to council procedure that wouldn't necessarily need an ordinance change, but possibly could. And I know that I'm going to bring those. So I wouldn't mind just seeing this pass tonight and taking it up again. Any further discussion? With that, I am so totally going to call a roll call vote on this one. Oh, yeah.
No, you still got to follow the rules.
Chair will entertain a motion to suspend the rules to do an opposite roll call vote.
Really?
Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Villauer. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, I hereby suspend the rules. I call a reverse roll call vote.
Oh my, okay, here we go. Bill Hauer. Tupper. Shetty.
Yes.
Paulson. Helene.
Yes.
Danforth.
Undecided. I'll be yes.
Pass.
Bueller. Bueller. That carries.
All right, thank you, Council. Item I is council approval of a resolution approving the plat of Lot 9A Jurens Schulte Industrial Addition to the municipality of Watertown in Cottington County and authorize the city manager to enter into a development agreement. Public Works Director Heath Van Eye, explain to us what this is about.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a plat before you this evening. This has gone through the Planning Commission and recommended by them for approval to the council. This is the vicinity map that I've shared onto Teams, and we are straight west of the city's wastewater treatment plant is where this is at. It would be an extension of 14th Avenue southeast. 14th Avenue comes off of Highway 81. It's just off the map over here to the west. And this is an I-1 zoning district. The plat for this area would be for one lot. I was seeing if we had that in relation to the aerial, but I'm not seeing that. But it is for one lot. The reason for the development agreement is for the public improvements to extend 14th Avenue through the extents of this platted lot, which of course goes right in line with the discussion we were having earlier this evening on orderly development and roads being extended through the extent of the lots being proposed to be developed on. And so that's what we've requested of the applicant. They have actually worked in tandem with the owners to the south, who also want to see this road constructed, so they're going into this project in tandem together, so there will be no need for city expense. But the south neighbor working with the north neighbor will both pay their fair share of the frontage costs to extend 14th and or any utility extensions would be required with that. With that, I think that pretty well sums it up, and I'll stand by for questions. Justin Peterson, Assistant City Engineer, I think is online with us upstairs, and of course Brandy Hanton is in the room as well.
Thank you, Director Van Eye. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution and authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement. Excuse me. Motion made by Councilman Paulson, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Hey, it's late. Open it up for discussion. Hearing no discussion, the motion is to approve the resolution and authorize the city manager to enter into the development agreement. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We're on to old business. Any old business? Councilman Villauer.
Have we gotten any word recently on our essential air service bid? Okay. Any idea when? I mean, it's been a while now. No? Okay.
Speculation is that sometime in April was when we would hear. And I believe so as well, but should be about time. Any further old business? Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would think this classifies as old business, and I know we've all gotten emails on this, but dispensary fees, I think, should be brought forward at a future council meeting to relook at those. They bring some really good evidence as to why, and I think listening to those three owners are in our best interest to at least listen.
Any further old business? City Manager Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. As it relates to the dispensary fees, is that a topic that you would like to see at a work session or at a subsequent council meeting?
Work session first.
Okay.
All right. Any new business? Councilman Danforth.
Mayor, I'd like to recommend, suggest that on a future work session that we consider reevaluation of the commercial lake zoning. We've heard a lot of concerns. They're legitimate concerns. We've had concerns, good, bad, or other. I think that it is worthy of all of us delving into that and seeing where we get. Worst case scenario, we get done, stays the same. If there's opportunity for improvement, then we need to get that ordinance out on the table, because I will tell you that the public wasn't aware of that, and they've stated that when that came out. And as they've become more in tune with what's in there, they're becoming increasingly more concerned. So I'd like to see that in a future work session, sooner than later, please.
Thank you, Councilman Danforth, and I would just say I am in support of that idea as well. Councilman Bueller.
I also would concur. I do think that if and when we do that, I think it might be good to include some of the folks from the Planning Commission in those discussions, if that's possible, in a work session.
I think that would be fine. And with that said, I want to reiterate what Councilman Danforth said. It's like not with any preconceptions that something is going to change. It's just to open it up to see what we have operated under it now for a while, and we can obviously see what some of the issues are, and we can address at least to see if there can be something done, and if not, we can deal with that too. But I think it deserves at least a look. Any further new business? Any liaison member reports? Or new business? Or
Sorry, under new business, yes.
Okay.
I was going to give a quick flood mitigation update.
Oh, thank you.
The EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, met this morning. Several individuals involved in those discussions in the Incident Command Center, including both chiefs here in the back of the room, city manager, myself, and then a whole litany of other folks that are involved with assessing and helping manage and mitigate any flood potentials. We had a call to the National Weather Service this morning. They were on the phone with us summarizing the flood potential. We're still in a moderate, a high likelihood of a moderate flood event. Really, the discussion this morning focused on a comparison with the 2019 conditions. If you recall, it's the last time that we had any moderate level of flooding. We've deployed measures to procure some high-capacity pumps. We do that every flood event to help protect our sanitary sewer lift stations and also our control isolation structures that help keep the river waters from coming up into our storm sewer system. So those pumps are one of the earliest necessities that we have. So wastewater superintendent Mike Berger and his staff have made an order for 22 of those pumps to be delivered to the city. I believe half of them, or a certain number of them, were delivered this afternoon. But staff will be setting those up accordingly to protect those lift stations and isolation structures. And if I'm forgetting anything, I'll defer to the city manager to expand on that. But that's generally where we're at with flood mitigation measures.
You were forgetting something, Director Von Eye, and that was you're forgetting that City Manager Mack wanted to give that update. Councilman Villauer.
Thank you, Mayor. Got a follow-up on that. I remember in 2019, we had to convene a special council meeting on a Sunday night. Those that are on the council should remember that, to make sure that we were authorized to do something. I mean, are we making sure that we're following or doing what we need to do, because we had to take action on that pronto?
Yes, so we have discussed that. We are not at a point where any emergency needs to be declared, and so emergency declarations are related to our reimbursements and what's available to us through the state and federal level.
So that's what we would have done that night.
Correct.
Okay.
Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up on that question, I do know that the pumps are starting to be put out, and those are rental pumps that cost significant amounts per week. And I do know from the past that that's always been reimbursable. So is it?
It's reimbursable if we hit a certain threshold and an emergency is officially declared by the state.
We can go back and still get the reimbursement even if we've paid?
Yes.
Okay.
I would note it may be highly unlikely this year, given that we are one of the few portions of the state, the northeast corner, that could be dealing with flood potential. In 2019, there was a vast majority of the state that was falling under the flood hazards, and the state then declared an emergency because they knew they were going to incur, the state through all these areas would incur more than, I think it was $1.6 million, which is the trigger point for FEMA to then begin reimbursement. So my understanding is that we would locally have to incur $1.6 million worth of expense before we would trigger that FEMA reimbursement. So it might be a small likelihood that we would get that reimbursed this year, is what I'm getting at.
Councilman Tupper.
When you were on the phone with National Weather Service, did they give you a little better guess between 1 and 30 inches of snow we're getting this week?
They actually said 1 in 35, so.
Any further new business? Any liaison member reports? Councilman Beeler.
Thank you. I thought I would have run out of words, but I had a rest and now I got some new ones. But I just wanted to update you with some Park and Rec information from our last couple of board meetings. We have installed 7 new members, and I think we've got a really good group of folks with a good cross section of talents and experiences in our park systems. But we're in the process of training them and onboarding them and kind of bringing them up to speed on some of the programs that were in place prior to them coming aboard. We did have discussions on the rodeo grounds. Mackenzie Blaze, who has been working with our, and I can't remember the name of his rodeo company, but KH, thank you. You know, the upgrades, he's continued to do that and invest his money and time, resources into that property, and we are considering the potential of leasing that property to them, which we would certainly make sure that the folks that are using it for 4-H and for the youth rodeos, high school and so forth, would continue to be able to use that at no charge to them. Also, Stockwell Engineering, who we have contracted with to work on evaluation of our parks, they're continuing to move forward with that, so we'll start to get some recommendations, and we'll be assisting with trying to gather information to assess our park systems, find out where we may have some shortfalls, things that we might want to change throughout, and you know, some of these even go into our bike trail to some degree, bike trails, or what do you want? I guess recreational trails is the term. But anyway, we also had discussions with the new board to make sure they understood the function of our board because of our home rule charter. That they would be a recommending board. They will no longer be a voting board, and so I think everybody's been brought up to speed in that regard. So that's just some updates on the Park and Rec.
Any other liaison member reports? Any announcements? Chair has one announcement. I was going to email the council, but I think that this deserves to be heard throughout the entire city and also to our staff. I want to say thank you. Sincere thank you to the council for the work that you put in. I know we've had a lot of short council meetings in the months preceding Christmas. We've had a lot of long ones lately, but those long meetings led to votes tonight that I believe were in the best interest of the city of Watertown to bring forward that unanimity of the council, and the exhaustive work that we put in, I hope shows the community of Watertown the commitment that we have to the process and to the people, that your voice will be heard, even if we have to stay here for 3 hours. Your voice will be heard and nobody will be cut off. And I think that that is important to the people of Watertown, to the process, and therefore I want to commend the council, but also all the staff, because they have to stay here too and deal with us. I really do want to say thank you. It's something I believe in very strongly as mayor, so I hope you can see some of the method behind my madness as far as what I'm trying to accomplish as mayor. So thank you for that very much. So no further announcements. We have no reason to go into executive session. Therefore, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Beeler. Any conversation on that? Hearing none. I am not going to roll call that. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Good night and God bless you, Watertown.